are listening to Bring Me the Axe. I'm Brian White, one half is more of an equation, and I'm joined by my co-host and brother Dave White. Dave, how you doing?
Thank you for asking. I'm doing all right. You know what I heard earlier today? Remember when John Travolta was announcing the, I think it was Idina Menzel
Yes.
one, and
he just fucked her name up.
Yeah, he called her Adele Dazeem. And I heard that today, and I hear it probably a lot more than you'd think. And every time I hear it, it makes me so uncomfortable. I think just because I am so profoundly embarrassed for him.
He's he said it with, I remember because I've seen the video, and he said it with a grin, and he did it with such oh God, what is the fuck? I'm tripping over the word. When you're certain that you're doing something right, he was
confidence. He had a lot of confidence.
Jesus fucking Christ. That's the word I was struggling to pull up. Yes. He said it with such confidence that I was like, you know what? Go on, John Travolta. You're doing.
Yeah, I mean, maybe even
okay.
Idina Menzel was like, oh, maybe it is my name. I don't know. But I heard every time I hear it, I'm just like, oh God, it just hurts. Not because I have any particular affinity for John Travolta. I don't even know why I'm talking about John Travolta, to be honest. But every time I hear it, I'm just like, oh, that is just so. Yeah. Because he was just like, well, it doesn't sound American, so yeah, you know what? I got to be close enough.
Yeah, it's good God, it's you're feeling the cringe, is what you're, as the kids put it.
Yeah, and I think that moment in Oscar history really kind of accurately describes my mood right now.
Yeah, man, it's been a fucking week for me as well. Like just touch and go is how things have been. Good God, so I've been looking forward to a little of this, talking movies.
Yeah. Talking, not just any movies.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll do the rundown here. So we practically grew up in neighborhood video stores. The steady diet of utter garbage that those shops provided us with continues unabated to this day. There's no one else I enjoy chopping it up with more about trashy movies than Dave. And just before we get into it, here's a little housekeeping. You want to keep up with us between episodes, you can also find us on Instagram at Bring Me the Axe Pod. Dave's over there at that werewolf. We have a lot of fun. So it's a good time, just bouncing ideas around, playing games with our followers. It's a good time. If you're on Instagram, then I understand a lot of people are. You should give us a follow.
Yeah,
you should, just because it'll make you feel good. Yep, and I'm also on TikTok if you're into that sort of thing. And if you don't know, we have another show called 99 Cent Rental, where we cover all manner of video store madness on the weeks when Bring Me the Axe is off. Our latest episode, covering 10 to Midnight, is out now. And we'll be back in 2 weeks with a look at Siege as we kick off our month-long Pride series.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to that one. I've never seen Siege.
It is.
The way I understand it is it's Assault on Precinct 13, but gay?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. It is very interesting for a lot of reasons that we will talk about. You would think this movie sounds ridiculous and probably offensive, and it is ridiculous, and it is a little bit offensive, but not as much as you'd think. It's also Canadian, so there's that.
Yeah, they're gentle.
Not that Canadians can't be homophobic, but
yeah. You can also contact us directly at bringmetheaxepod@gmail.com with any questions, comments, or suggestions. Do let us know if there's a movie that you love and would like to hear us give it the old business. Lastly, if you like what you hear, you can subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. We're on YouTube now. Search us by name and subscribe if you prefer to consume your podcast that way. And you'd be doing us a favor by leaving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So get to it already.
Do it.
You know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to sit here right now, and we're just going to put this whole thing off until you do it. You're just going to listen to me kind of ramble and babble and just kind of pester you until you push that button with the 5 stars.
Yeah, I mean, I just spent a bunch of minutes talking about John Travolta. Don't think I can't do it.
Because we got skills. We've been doing this for a little while.
Yeah, I can filibuster like a motherfucker.
Yeah. Hey, and if you listen on YouTube, do us a favor, give the episode a like and leave a comment. We love hearing from you guys. Just want to get that all out of the way right at the top of the show, because usually this is where I give you a taste of the movie that we're talking about. tonight. But tonight we're actually talking about several movies. This was actually supposed to be a 99-cent rental episode about Cool World, which we kind of kicked down the road a little ways because...
Which I think we're still going to do it because, goddamn, that has got a production history and a half.
It's a crazy fucking movie. Like, I've got like 10 pages of fucking notes about it, and I haven't even addressed the story yet. Yeah, it's crazy.
Story's not good.
No.
Story's terrible.
It's pretty bad. It's fucking bad for, there's a reason that nobody really thinks back on Cool World fondly. But yeah, just because as we were kind of getting ready to do all that on May 9th of this year, Roger Corman died.
Mm-hmm. He was 148 years old.
And he produced something like 1,024 movies.
Yep.
No, in truth, he was 98 years old. Man, lived a full fucking life.
And he produced like almost 500 movies. Now, some of those were executive produced, in which he had almost nothing to do with them other than distribution. Yeah. But still, that is a shitload of movies. This is someone who is just like making multiple films per year for like 7 decades.
And in some cases, a movie would be like 5 or 6 movies released in a month would bear his name in one way or another. Jesus fucking Christ. Like, nobody touched the film industry like he did. And that's not hyperbolic. I don't believe that what I'm saying there is like an exaggeration in any way, because like I can get a little ridiculous sometimes with my statements, but modern cinema owes a tremendous debt to this man, just in the way that he produced movies, the way that he found funding for them and sort of like paved the way for other filmmakers to do very similar things. He introduced, he was sort of the prime mover behind the entire New Hollywood movement in many ways. Mm-hmm. Like, it's crazy.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say his influence on the film industry is unparalleled. Like, there's just nobody else. Not just because of he made a bunch of movies. Like, he didn't direct as many movies as we probably would think that he had.
No, I was actually really surprised to find out how few he actually did. Like, he directed quite a few, but I think
a lot of shit though. Like, a lot of it's not very good.
No. But like, I think he really did kind of like find his calling in production. And like that's really where he takes off. But like, he fosters a bunch of like very young filmmakers who were coming right like out of USC, UCLA at the time, who would then eventually like they would make a movie in a day out of some Soviet sci-fi movie that he bought, and like decided there weren't enough chicks in this movie. So Francis Ford Coppola, why don't you go, here's $3,000 in 1 day of production. Like, why don't you go fill that out a little bit? And then like 10 years, 10 years later, he's out there making fucking Apocalypse Now. And in a lot of ways defying every lesson he learned from Roger Corman that way.
Yeah. It's like Scorsese, Coppola, Jonathan Demme, Ron Howard, John Sayles, Joe Dante, Jack Nicholson, Dennis Hopper, James Cameron, Peter Bogdanovich, and a fuckload of other people. Yeah. And like everybody in a particular period, like I would say probably from like the mid 70s ish until probably maybe like early 70s to mid to late 80s. Everyone's just like, oh, well, I walked into Roger Corman's office and I was like, I'm going to write a picture for you. And he was like, who are you? And then they would say who they were. And he'd be like, all right, well, what's your idea? Here's $12. Go make it. Like he seemed like everybody, he just sort of was like, everybody's got a fucking chance here. Let's just do it. Because, it's like he knew he could sell it because he was a very, very convincing sort of financier and showman wrapped up into one. Like, because I think he knew his ideas weren't that great, but he knew how to make shit happen in a way, like, and he would get it done so efficiently and so far under budget that even if the thing wasn't that good, you still really couldn't argue with it.
No, and like everything was marketable in one way or another, because like he was extremely canny in exploiting trends and sort of like popular ideas with young people, and like
I wouldn't say exploiting. I think he adapted very, very well and just knew where to hit and when.
Yeah, his timing is crazy.
Because he would make shit that people wanted.
Yeah, like there's the fact that he was so far ahead of the curve on biker movies in particular is one that I kept going in all the research I was doing. I kept going back to the Wild Angels because
not a very good movie.
Not a very good movie, but like he got it because like honestly, it seems like it was like everybody liked the Wild Ones. And they, and that's really kind of like the flashpoint for that whole thing. But like, if it wasn't for the Wild Angels, there wouldn't really be an Easy Rider, which is really kind of like the flashpoint for that whole like 70s auteur thing, right?
Yep.
And it's just, I don't know, it's weird how he was constantly in the right place at the right time in a way that I would otherwise kind of find suspicious, but he was such a one of a kind character that it just sort of seems like he's just that guy. 'Cause like on this pod in particular, we talk about a couple of filmmakers, probably more than others. And like Corman's one of them, but Charles Band is the other one who I have always kind of felt was like the sort of spiritual successor to
like
Corman.
more like a bottom shelf.
For sure.
Kinda,
Yeah.
Well,
I don't know. I would say that like
he had the same panache, but maybe not the same clout, I think.
No, definitely not the same clout, but he definitely had the same sort of ambitions where because there were times where Corman would be like, okay, I can't really put this off. I have to spend some money on this movie. But then he would always find a way to sort of like repurpose the footage into something else. Because there's a series of movies that he made in the 80s that I very clearly remember. And I posted elsewhere on our socials because I find the spaceship in Battle Beyond the Stars so fucking hilarious. But like we'll talk about one of these movies in particular when we talk about House of Usher. But like it was always this sort of thing where it was like, okay, there is a movie that I need. I can't avoid it. I want to make this movie. We got to do more than we usually do with this one. But Battle Beyond the Stars was definitely one of those because that was a movie that like Mom rented for probably for me because you were probably very little at the time when that one came out. And that was one that she looked at and she was like, oh, well, that's a Star Wars. And he likes Star Wars. So like, I'll do this. But like, that's
a real sexy Star Wars.
It's like the horniest Star Wars ripoff out there. That's the one that like, you could probably, if you're of a certain age, you've probably seen it. It's the one where the spaceship has boobs.
Yeah, it's also like, what if Princess Leia wore that slave costume just all the time?
It was Sybil Danning, like constantly talking in double entendres. But then, like after he spent the money, he was like, "Okay, I'm gonna make 3 more fucking space movies, and I'm going to use all of the space footage that we shot in this one." Because I remember that after that, I'm sort of blanking. Space Raiders, I think, is what it was called. And that was I think it's the one with George Peppard. So like the week after Mom rented Battle Beyond the Stars, she rented that one, and I was like, what is the fucking deal with this spaceship? Because like the same ship is in that movie, which is also a Corman production. And apparently I have not seen the other ones, but I was like, that was the first time like I cocked an eyebrow. I was like, what the fuck is happening in these movies?
I think he learned that from, well, I was probably born out of necessity, but he learned most of that from working at AIP because Samuel Arkoff and James Nicholson had like no money, and they were a little bit cheap when it came to making movies. So I think they trusted him enough because he had made some of the biggest things for them, and so they were willing to give a little bit. But I think the understanding was always like, make it worth the money though, and that often meant you're going to use this here. You're also going to use this in about 5 other movies.
Oh, right.
Yeah, you're going to use Vincent Price, but make sure he comes in 2 days under schedule. So maybe. Like, that's why Boris Karloff is in Targets, because Bogdanovich wanted to make a movie, and he was like, well, where's your script? Let me see it. He was like, script's pretty good. Well, I don't need Boris Karloff for the rest of the day. Go for it. And Targets is a pretty great movie.
It is a pretty good movie, because he also did this with the Raven. Yep. Right, and we'll talk about the Raven a little bit, because that's one of my favorites. But like they finished the movie early, and they had Karloff and Jack Nicholson was just kind of hanging around because he'd take anything at the time. But they also had the sets for like the weekend because the crews weren't going to come in, and like they wrapped on a Friday. The crews weren't going to come in till Monday to like break down the sets. So they're just like, okay, write something real quick and we'll make an entire fucking movie over the weekend with Boris Karloff and Jack Nicholson. And they make The Terror out of it, which is a terrible fucking movie.
The Terror is not a good movie.
Like, to this day, nobody can tell you what it's really about. But and you can,
it is a movie written in 2 days.
You can see it on Boris Karloff's face in that one. Because like in The Raven, this was a movie that was prepared and it was pre-produced and it was written by, Richard Matheson. And it's a great movie. I enjoy it tremendously. And everybody in that movie appears to be having the time of their life. Whereas Boris Karloff seems to have this look on his face throughout The Terror where he's like, I wonder if I'm doing this right.
Well, yeah, because in his head, he's just like, I trusted you.
Yeah. It's a hell of a legacy to have left behind. And even though I knew the dude was almost 100 years old, it was still shocking as hell to find out that he died.
Yeah, because he just seemed like someone who just kept going. He was 98 and still working. Like he had shit in production when he died. Now, he was probably very involved very little in all of that, but still, I mean, I'm in my mid-40s and I can barely get up in the morning.
I know he's definitely one of those guys that I think about it. It's like, God damn, man, like maybe I can make a movie. Because I would love to make a fucking movie, That's
listen. I watched last night. Was it Bill Rebane, the Wisconsin filmmaker who made Monster a Go-Go?
Yeah.
And a bunch of other shit. I watched Monster a Go-Go last night, and every time I see stuff like that, I think to myself, I am just in awe of this era. Not now, because I think now it's really easy. You can do this shit on your phone if you want to, but like back then, when people would be like, "Say, I could make a picture," and everyone would be like, "No, you can't." And they'd be like, "I'll show you." And then they would just go out and make a fucking movie. Now, the movie was absolutely terrible.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
But they made a movie when it was not easy to do that.
I know, right? There was a real barrier to entry at the time. And there was a period in my life, like when this technology was starting to sort of mature, as far as like amateur filmmaking goes, independent filmmaking, I was like, man, this is great. Like literally anybody can make a movie. And thank fucking God for that. And then everybody really did kind of come around and take advantage of that. And then we ended up with a movie like Skinamarink. And I think that at a certain point, like maybe that barrier to entry sort of needs to be around in order to sort of gatekeep, just to kind of gatekeep quality a little bit. But
it's like that was Fran Lebowitz, that paraphrased quote she often says about Toni Morrison when she's like, when Toni Morrison said to tell your story, she didn't mean you.
Yeah. Oh man. But let's talk about Roger Corman a little bit because he's a very interesting guy. So he was born in 1926, right? And
there was a war on.
There was a war on. See, and he
there actually wasn't, but
no, but he did serve during World War II. But I don't think he saw action or anything like that. But he was training as an industrial engineer. And the story that I kept seeing that I thought was very funny was he finally he gets out of the Army, or I think he was in the Navy, actually. He gets out of essentially he's discharged and he goes to work and he starts work for some company on a Monday and he quits on a Thursday and he tells the guy, I've made a terrible mistake, which is quite a thing to sort of declare all of a sudden. Like when you,
this is a thing. I feel that way every third day of my life.
Oh, Jesus Christ. I know. Like I definitely did. That's sort of the thing that I did with like mine in terms of career, where I took the safe option when there are times when I look back and it's like, God damn, I wish I hadn't taken the safe option sometimes, but what do you do? But he
just keep changing career, I guess.
Just like him. Cause he eventually finds his way into, 20th Century Fox, like one of them, and it's essentially that story of I started in the mailroom, because he quite literally started in the mailroom.
You could just fucking walk. You'd be like, I'll walk into Jack Warner's office and be like, I work for you now, sir. And he'd be like, great, what do you do? I don't know, anything. Well, you're a production assistant now. It just seems like everybody who wanted to work, I went to California, I went to Los Angeles, and I went to Paramount and I got a job. And it's like, you can't even get near a studio lot at this point.
Right.
Let alone be like, well, I just walked into Louis Mayer's office and he told me to get the fuck out. Called me an anti-Semitic name. Well, obviously not him, but they all have these stories about I just walked in And that's how I started. And every time I hear that, I'm like, God, fuck you.
I know, right? You walk in and be like, I like you. You got moxie, kid.
It's like every fucking movie, like everyone who wanted to work in Hollywood, it's like Citizen Kane. You just walk in and you're like, I can do everything. What do you need? I'm like, what? How? No.
Yeah.
That's not how any of this happened.
No, well,
but it was how it happened.
Not anymore. It's not. But back then, yeah, for sure. And then, like, yeah.
I mean, there was also a shitload of downsides to that, and everybody was being exploited.
Sure, and I mean, even Corman, to a degree, was being exploited because a big part of his story, and the reason that he eventually sort of strikes out on his own is because he eventually kind of works his way to a script reader. So he's basically. What he does is he literally like reads scripts for producers and then he writes a synopsis. And
he's what's her name in
Sunset Boulevard?
In Sunset Boulevard.
Yeah. So and then he like he'll sort of like give any thoughts and apparently like he didn't like anything that came at him and so like eventually this like Western comes his way. And he sort of adds some notes to it and said, like, here's some ideas that I think would make this better. And then the story editor incorporates them into the script, and then they produce the movie. And the story editor basically gets credit for his work, and he's like, "What the fuck just happened?" And they're like, "Hey, them's the breaks."
It still works that way a little bit. Like you do like punch up on a script, you don't get credit.
Oh no,
for it.
like,
I mean, you get paid for it.
But the guild has like certain rules for like how screen credits work and you've got to like the sort of produced screenplay has to have a certain percentage of your written work in order to do this. And like honestly, like his ideas probably represented like a very small percentage of the finished.
Yeah, put her in a sexy slave outfit.
Probably that. More dinosaurs.
Yeah.
And so like but he becomes very disillusioned by it. He's like, fuck this shit. And so he quits. And he drums up a little bit of money, and he writes a movie called Highway Dragnet. That wasn't what it was called. That's what it was eventually released as. And he just kind of like gets the bug, and sort of like he makes another movie. I think it's called Monster from the Ocean Floor. It's like a real crappy like B movie with a rubber monster and like
real drive-in shit.
Real like because that was
like his first 10 movies are like real B movie stuff.
Right. And so but what he ends up doing is like he meets the Sam, I think it's Sam Arkoff and James Nicholson from ARC. It was called American Releasing Company at the time.
Yeah.
And he was also at the same time being courted by some of the majors, but what he really wanted was he wanted to be paid up front so that he could immediately put other shit into production. And and
for context, this is 1958, 59.
Yeah. And so like really the only company that would do that was ARC. And so like he falls in with them and he makes a movie called The Fast and the Furious, which is
now what you should say about this, because their histories and their futures become very much entwined.
Yes.
But that is what was happening at the time was that when they started their company, when Arkoff and Nicholson started their company, they were just going to distribute movies, but there weren't movies to distribute because there was a kind of like a drought in Hollywood that like there were no movies really being, and there were big budget movies being made, but not a lot of little stuff for them to distribute. And so they kind of were like, well, shit, what are we going to do? And they were like, hey, we met this guy. He seems to have a lot going for him. He says he can make movies. What if we just let him make a movie and then we'll be a production company? And that's how they become AIP. And that's essentially how Corman gets his start in like becoming a director, becoming who he was.
Right. Cause like he's really best known for being a producer, but like in his earliest days up until about the mid 60s, he's also directing the movies that he produces, and like and
he's a fairly unremarkable director. I mean, he's not bad at it. He's very competent, but
right. But it's not until he really hits his stride with House of Usher. And that's mostly because he's not also the director of photography on the movie. Like they've got a proper crew at this point, right?
Yeah.
But yeah.
But he had sort of been picking up people along the way. Because he would have this, he had this sort of, what he would do when they would finish making a movie is he would like take everybody that had worked on the thing and he would write their names and he'd make 3 lists. And one of them was like, these are people I don't ever want to work with again. They were terrible. I don't want to work with them. And there were middle ones that were like, yeah, these people were fine. Like in a pinch, if you need somebody, they're dependable. And then the last list was, these are people I will absolutely work with again. That's why all these people keep showing up. He basically assembles a crew that he will work with for the next 25, 30 years. And it's the same actors, the same crew members, same everybody, because he just found really dependable people. Now, I think his version is probably a lot rosier than theirs might be.
I know. To hear Jack Nicholson talk about it is his whole thing was he hung around Corman because it was really fucking hard to get legitimate work out of these studios at the time. And Corman would just call him up because Nicholson would just do whatever the fuck he asked him to do. And so he always had work, but he very seldom, he got paid, but he didn't really get paid very much. And a lot of the times he was also doing other shit around the set and not getting credit for it. But it didn't fucking matter because everybody was just hungry and young and they wanted to work more than anything.
And that's sort of, I think, one of the more disappointing things to learn about him is that he really put a lot on these other younger people. I mean, especially as he got a little bit older and more established. And I don't know if he thought of it that way or saw it that way. I think in his head, he was just like, well, I can't do this. I don't really know how, or I'm not very good at it. This person wants to. Here you go. Here's your opportunity. And it's like, yeah, I guess, but also you're kind of taking advantage of them.
For sure.
And that was, but in doing that, there was kind of an upside to it because he was super controlling. He was always very controlling of everything. Not when it came to the creative side of it, which I think is why a lot of people liked working with him, is like he wouldn't interfere, probably because he didn't really know how. Like he wasn't a writer. And so he couldn't really write these stories. He could write a story in as much as anybody can write a story, but like he wasn't that good at it. And so he would just sort of be like, here you go, John Sayles, write a movie or whatever. And he wouldn't really interfere with people because he was so focused on the back end stuff, the finances. But by doing this, by like kind of just handing over creative control to whoever, there wasn't a lot of bureaucracy. So you didn't have to go through all these extra steps, all these like too many cooks situations. Yeah. It would just be like, we've got 2 weeks to make this movie. Let's get this shit done. You did 3 drafts. Great. Good enough.
Right.
Let's go.
Yeah. It might, I think that might really be kind of like the upside to it. Like, I mean, he really did kind of put the exploitation in exploitation movies in that way.
Yeah. And I don't mean to suggest that I think that's okay. I really don't think it's okay what he was doing. I just don't know that he saw it that way. I think he was just like, no, we can bang, bang, bang. We got to fucking move, everybody. Let's do this.
Yeah. But also at the same time, like in these, particularly in this time, like it wasn't like he just kind of like set everybody to work and then fucked off. Like he was definitely there with them, like putting in the work and doing all the shit. So, I mean, like, yes, there's definitely some exploitation happening here. He's taking advantage of people who were not going to get work elsewhere and we're hungry as fuck. But to your point, he also gave him a lot of room to sort of be as creative as they wanted to and make the fucking movies that they did, right, as long as they included like bam, 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 like these 3 things. Because what do you know about Nikatsu and pink film in Japan?
Very, very little. I've seen like a handful of. I don't like it. I find it kind of dirty and sleazy.
Yeah. But they also had a very, very similar sort of thing where the production company did not give a fuck what kind of movies were made. And they did the same thing where like you could just go to Nikatsu and say, I want to make a movie. And they'd be like, fucking fine. Here's a thing. There's got to
be 4 songs in it.
It's got to have.
One of them has to star a female singer who also has a switchblade, but definitely gets raped.
Yeah. Like there's got to be like,
and that is essentially that's what they needed in those movies. That's kind of why I don't like them.
It's got to be violent. It has to have sex, which in those terms were very unpleasant. But like beyond that, like it needs to have like 3 nude scenes. It has to, have Yakuza in it, and it has to do this. And then they would sort of like set these filmmakers to work who were often like really, really kind of artsy avant-garde type guys who would make really fucking bizarre movies that, did in fact have those bullet points that they needed to them, but they were also psychedelic as fuck and really, really visually interesting.
Well, it's like House. Like when like Toho wanted to make House, they were like, we want a movie that's just like Jaws. And the guy was like, great, got it. He goes away and he makes House and comes back and they were like, this is exactly what you wanted. And it is the most bonkers fucking movie I've ever seen. It is a wonderful film, but holy shit, it does not make a lot of sense, and it is definitely not like Jaws.
well, somebody does get eaten by a piano, though. So yeah. But yeah, like, I mean, but that really, I think is kind of, I don't know to what degree like Nikatsu had exposure to sort of like foreign markets such as like in America, but like it does feel very like a common kind of exploitation thing where it's like, I don't give a fuck what you make, just make it cheap, have it do these things that people are coming to watch these movies for. Beyond that, I don't care what you do, just like do whatever the fuck you want. And then the next thing you know, it's got like 6 groovy psychedelic musical numbers in the middle of a violent gangland Yakuza movie. You know,
I think at a certain point though, like, especially as you get into the 70s and like mid to late 70s, money starts coming from really questionable places.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And so that's, I mean, I guess that's that's when they really don't give a shit. Like,
right.
I mean, Arkoff and Nicholson definitely cared. They didn't want to make something like, especially in the 50s and 60s. They don't want to make anything sleazy.
Right. Because they definitely want to avoid controversy, no matter how small the movies are. Because I mean, the point is to make fucking money, and they don't want to upset people.
And I think what Corman is interesting, because to go back to one of the things you said earlier, I think he was so dialed in because he's in California, like they're deeply entrenched in like Los Angeles culture, and so much of this shit is coming out of LA.
Oh yeah. You
know, when like the biker stuff, the surfing stuff, like all of this, like there's a different style in New York that's you don't see in AIP movies. These are very Hollywood, very Los Angeles movies. And I think because he's so dialed in, he's so like attuned to everything. And he's like, okay, great. I see this is coming up. We need to start making these movies, because he was paying attention to what people wanted. I think that's what made him so good at it. Like he would just be like, I think this is going to be a thing that's going to hit. Let's get on this now. And everyone around him was so young and also kind of involved that you could get something like Easy Rider or 5 Easy Pieces or like, you know, shit like that. Cause it's like, well, yeah, Nicholson and Hopper, that's them. That's like their scene. I mean, I think for one of the first movies we're going to talk about eventually is a movie that is very much related to a hipster scene that he was a part of.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy, but also like a lot of that sort of pop cultural, like that kind of targeting in on sort of popular trends also kind of came from Arkoff, who apparently had some kind of a system that was kind of a little bit like, it was like an acrostic that was kind of like the Dennis system from It's Always Sunny, where like how he figured out what they want, like what kind of movies they wanted to make and exactly who they wanted to appeal to. Cause like, I mean, the thing that AIP was also doing that other film studios were not, was they were focus grouping their movies.
Mm-hmm. Cause they realized that the teen market, the youth market, was a thing that was coming up, and other, the big studios didn't take that seriously. They didn't make movies for young people. They made melodramas essentially, or westerns or whatever. And I think they realized like this is a huge, huge market. Now, this is a thing everybody has to keep in mind, is that prior to the late 50s, there was no youth market because young people didn't have money. They weren't really a thing. You either like were a very young child or you worked.
Yeah.
Like that was kind of how it was. You helped support your family in one way or another. And then obviously we get the late 50s and then indefinitely in the 60s, you start to see people having more, younger people having disposable income, which meant that they could go to the movies. That's where they spent most of their money, was movies and music, which is why you have such a huge fucking boom in both of those fields at the time. And they were really the ones that were like, hey, why don't, instead of trying to make, like Rebel Without a Cause or something like that. Rebel Without a Cause is really the one where they're like, holy shit, there is a market for this.
Yeah.
But instead of trying to make these big movies, what if we just make movies for these people? Because they're just out there spending their money and they don't really care. It's the same thing that happens with horror movies. Is like horror movies, we get so many of them in the 70s and 80s because young people had money and wanted to see movies. They just didn't really have higher standards.
No.
Like they didn't really give a shit. They didn't care if there were big stars in them. They just wanted to see certain things. Like in the 80s, you get so many slashers because it's like, what do we want? Violence, tits, a rockin' soundtrack. That's about it. That's really, because they're not paying that much attention and they don't really care that much. This is the same formula. This is the AIP formula. They're saying like, this is an audience and we're going to listen to them. And because nobody had listened to them. And I think, kids really responded to that. They were like, hey, they're putting out movies we want to see. Are they good movies? No. Do I love them? Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
These movies are very important to me.
Yeah. And I mean, I suppose that's very empowering when you sort of feel like somebody's listening and sort of tailoring the product to you specifically.
I mean, especially at a time when you really weren't being listened to by anybody. And that gets even more so in the 60s when you start to see the counterculture movement is starting to take shape. The adults are still being very dismissive of that, and they're minimizing those concerns. And here comes these filmmakers who are also all young people. They're pretty hip, cool. They're including musicians in movies. And they're like, hey, we think the things you're concerned about really matter. Your loves, your lives, your passions, that shit matters. And we're going to pander a little bit. But I think they genuinely believed a lot. I mean, not Arkoff and Nicholson. They just wanted the money. But
yeah,
they did sort of believe in all of this. And that's why it works. Because for the first time, you have this generation, this baby boom generation, that's really being taken seriously in a way that they had never been taken seriously before, and in a way that they were not being taken seriously anywhere else in their lives.
Yeah, also at a pivotal moment for them.
Yes.
Because all of this is happening as the boomers are becoming teenagers.
Yep.
And so like it's just being at ground zero of a really, really sort of important kind of pop cultural moment.
Yeah. And we're not going to talk about a lot of these other, because there's, obviously I can go off on AIP and all of this stuff for hours and hours, but there are other movies that really get into this, biker movies, but there's also like the drug movies are
the Trip,
wild.
the Trip
stuff
and
like
Head.
Gas and The Trip and Head, the fucking monkeys, the weirdo monkeys movie. And I think Corman was less interested in that because he was a little bit older.
Right.
And so I think he was but he was still very much involved in all of that.
Yep.
I think we chose 4 very specific movies.
Yeah. One of the things I did in prep for this was I watched a documentary just before we kind of move into that area. It was called Corman's World, and it's a pretty good documentary about him. But one of the things that he talked about is specifically that point in the AIP cycle when they were making the sort of like dope movies. And apparently because he wanted to sort of understand and really kind of get his head around what was happening, he took LSD and really enjoyed himself.
Yeah, Otto Preminger did the same thing. When he made Skidoo, he was like, all right, I'm going to see what all the kids are on. Now, Otto Preminger, when he made Skidoo, was like in his 60s. He was like, let's see what this is all about. Calls up his friend Groucho Marx, and it's just like, Skidoo is the weirdest fucking movie you've ever seen because it does not make any sense why there are so many giant famous people in it, and it is about drugs. But he was just like, let's see what this is all about. And he was like, I think I understand the young people now. Now, Otto Preminger continued being a giant piece of shit the rest of his life, but still, he did that thing, and that was okay.
Yeah. But like, so I think tonight what we're going to talk about is primarily AIP movies, right?
Yeah, like all of them are. Well, no, not the last one.
Not the last one. But because Corman is probably ostensibly best known for his tenure with AIP, even though it was I think it was the shortest that he sort of laid with a particular company, because like eventually he splits with them. Arkoff seems to lose.
I mean, AIP only lasts for 25 years.
Yeah, like Arkoff eventually seems to like actually lose interest in making movies, and he just like sells a company. But by that point, Corman had split, and eventually he starts up New World Pictures, which is a massively important company, particularly to fans of horror movies.
Yeah, horror and sci-fi. It's like there are a few bigger names.
Yeah. And then, New World eventually, like after he splits with them, New World eventually comes to own Marvel Comics at one point, and Mattel as well. But by that point, he'd split again, and he'd started up a company called Concord.
Yeah, it doesn't last very long, and it's you start to see the decline in his output.
Yeah, because this is the point where we're starting to go into the 90s, and he's making movies like Carnosaur and shit like that.
Yeah, when the shot on video stuff comes along, that's sort of when he's like, now we can move even faster. And it's like, okay, buddy, hold on.
That's really his like late full moon period, if we can sort of analogize it to anything.
Yeah.
Like this is the Ginger Dead Evil Bong kind of period for him, where things like he's still producing like crazy, but nothing is noteworthy in any way whatsoever.
Yeah, we're leading up to Sharknado.
Yeah, because eventually he makes a deal with Sci-Fi, and he produces a ton of crappy shit that people.
And that's when it's all over.
Yeah. But he's got a ton of just awesome, fun bullshit to talk about, and this stuff is, for me in particular, is very important to me, as sort of, these are formative pictures for me, because like we've talked about this a little bit, but like we're old, and so like we remember the times, like we remember the before times, right? And so like you didn't have like a million channels, like this is before cable and shit like that, and so like every town, every like local broadcasting company had not necessarily like a horror movie with a host kind of thing, like Svengoolie or something like that, but everybody had a show that sort of like just broadcast garbage because it was cheap and you can just put it on in the middle of the afternoon. It's appropriate for everybody. And near us, we had a show called The Creature Double Feature, which was a Saturday afternoon thing, and a lot of their programming hinged on AIP stuff. Yep. So like these were the first horror movies that I had ever seen, and a lot of them bore the name Corman. Like I remember being utterly terrified by a moment in It Conquered the World, where this sort of like mind control thing.
Weird choice.
I know, right? But I was also like 7, so like cut me some slack. But like there were moments in that were utterly terrifying to me, and like I look back now and I'm like, good God, I was such a fucking baby.
Yeah, well, these are, I think, that experience, well, for me anyway, really formative, just watching those movies, because it was
all that was available, first of all.
It was all that was available, and it was, this idea of, like, it was the 80s, and we went out and rode bikes. I mean, yeah, kind of, but also we watched a fuckload of TV, and that was not just us. That was everybody watched a fuckload of TV. And, I think we've probably brought it up before, like, we grew up in a household where our father absolutely loved old Hollywood. And so we kind of had that very much ingrained in us to respond to these movies. Like we used to go to the theater.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And to see, old movies every week, he would take us to see them. And so I think we're sort of predisposed to that. And then this is what's on TV. And even as I grew up, a lot of this stuff, even into adulthood, a lot of this stuff continued to resonate, especially when we get to the post stuff. I'll explain a little bit about why, for me anyway. Yeah. But I still watch these movies, and I still think they're great, because I think they're, as much as they shot this shit really fast and cheap, there's a lot of artistry in it, and there's a lot of fun in it.
Yeah.
And nobody's taking themselves too seriously. And I think that's why, like, even when, you're watching something like Dawn of the Dead and they're having a pie fight, it's like, this is the dumbest shit ever, and yet it still feels right.
Yeah, but also, that's the thing, is this is also so firmly tied to kind of the Saturday morning experience for me that I eventually start to find it in other places. Like my personal, like if you were to meet me and spend any time with me and sort of really talk to me, you start to find that like I have a kind of a personal aesthetic that's like really very closely tied, not necessarily to the sort of grueling, intense horror movies that I do sometimes quite enjoy quite a bit, but like I'm really more into like fucking Booberry and the Munsters and the Addams Family and the Twilight Zone. And so like I've got this weird kind of like 60s fascination with like kitschy, silly kind of 60s those kind of kiddie horror movie experience, Aurora models, and just this basically everything that I eventually kind of find to be embodied in the band The Misfits, who upon hearing them were immediately my favorite band ever.
Until 1983, everything after that
not so much. But yeah, but like that, like I mean, it's just a package of all of my favorite shit. Like weird, ghoulish sense of humor, Vincent Price, Boris Karloff. I love all of that shit. Bonus points if it's in black and white.
Yeah, this is square. Like, this is my favorite era of film to talk about, from the 50s to the 70s. That is my favorite era. As much as I love, 70s and 80s horror movies and science fiction to a little bit lesser extent, this is my favorite era because, as we will talk about when we talk about these movies, nobody had done this shit yet. And there's something really cool about it in the fact that they did it with a sense of humor, and it's smart, and it's not cynical yet.
No.
It's
so
cynical
weird that,
eventually.
It's so weird that given the kind of deep historical background of Gothic horror in particular in Hollywood, it's so weird to me that it took them so fucking long to get around to the stuff that eventually kind of becomes AIP's like signature brand, right?
Well, yeah, because horror had such a bad reputation. I mean, even when Carl Laemmle started making horror in the 30s, like had to convince his father to let him make horror movies at Universal in the early 30s, like pulling teeth. He was like, no, I swear to God, this will work out well for us. And they were like, I don't know about that. You say Dracula is the name of this book? Never heard of it.
Look here,
Written
kid.
by a homosexual? Get out of here. And yet they become huge. But by the time we get to the 50s, it's schlock again.
Yeah.
It's Creature from the Black Lagoon, and they're losing money. So when AIP comes around, when Corman comes around, and they're like, no, I think we can do this. These horror movies, these sci-fi movies, I think we can make these movies and they'll be great. That's why everybody was like, no, you can't. That's garbage now. It was respectable when they made Dracula and Frankenstein, but even those movies take a pretty quick nosedive, within 10 years. And that's when they were like, that's because you're thinking of it wrong. Like, they don't get it.
Yeah, right. It doesn't take them very long for the movies to be like Son of Frankenstein and...
now, I love those movies.
Although they're great, but they're significantly... It's a pretty steep decline from like the original pictures, but... whatever.
That's because it doesn't have the same sort of literary cachet that obviously Dracula comes from a stage play and a book. Frankenstein comes from a book. Like all of these movies, eventually you get Wolfman, which is a new, an original story, and Creature from the Black Lagoon and all that. But like leading up to it, there was like, okay, I think we can sell this because it does have that sort of literary connection. But by the time you get to the 50s and you're like, it's a Creature from the Haunted Cave, you say?
Plan 9 from outer space.
And even then, they're trying to sort of trade a little bit on the back of something like Godzilla, which is a very culturally specific movie about nuclear fallout, I guess, unfortunately. But that is from a culture that had a direct and absolutely horrific experience with it. Whereas in the US, you start to get stuff like Them, and the fucking giant bug movies, essentially, where it's like, oh, you're afraid of it, you don't get it though, you don't get why their movie is so much more elevated,
right? And
so it's like, here's the just like very American to be like, well, here's the shitty version of it. And that was kind of why they were like, all right, I'm in, let's do this. But there was an audience for it, and that was what the big studios didn't get. It's like, the kids don't care if it has literary cachet. As a matter of fact, they don't want that. Even when the Poe movies came around, like when he was like, I want to do these movies, because Corman had built up enough of a reputation and enough clout to be like, what do you want to make, I guess? And he was like, I want to make these movies. I love Edgar Allan Poe. I want to make these films. And they were like, why would kids want to go watch a movie about the books they're forced to read in school? That is literally what they said to him. And he was like, don't worry about it. I got this.
Yeah.
I'm going to go get a bunch of aging Hollywood stars.
Right. So what we did for this, and to sort of give this a little bit of body and some direction, is what we both picked two of our favorite Corman and Corman related movies.
Well, someone just stole two of mine, but it's fine. I found out.
Hey, I hit them first and you went, God damn it. It just means that we got good taste. But yeah, just to sort of give them a little bit of direction, sort of give this a little bit of body. So what we chose was one that's one movie that is kind of an obvious pick, and another that is maybe not so obvious, a bit of a deep cut. And so we're going to start with Dave's deep cut. And this is 1959's A Bucket of Blood.
Blood.
Yeah. So this is the sort of most noteworthy for being the kind of originator of the Dick Miller, Walter Paisley character that appears in all of Joe Dante's movies.
Yep.
Yeah. And so like, and the concept is, I'll just run it down real quick, is it's about a guy named Walter Paisley who waits tables at this like beatnik hangout called the Yellow Door. And everybody talks down to him because he's just kind of this like snivelly, whiny shithead. But also they're all a bunch of like hipster beatnik, they're the real thing by comparison. But he has designs of being a sculptor, but doesn't really seem to have the skill or the patience to really kind of develop the skills. But when he accidentally kills the neighbor's cat, he casts it in clay and takes it down to the yellow door, to which everybody sees it and is just like immediately taken by it and declares him like a genius. And then eventually one of his new fans like gives him a little bit of heroin, and there's all these like undercover cops hanging around the yellow door trying to figure out who's the supplier for the heroin. They follow him home, and he ends up accidentally killing this undercover cop. And so with the body to dispose of, he puts him in clay and sort of shows it to his new patrons, who are horrified and amazed by it at the same time.
This is basically Contrivance the movie.
Essentially, yeah. Because then eventually, like, they're like, this guy's amazing. It's the real shit. Like, I can't fucking believe this. And so he's kind of like declared the new thing, and he suddenly has all of this like respect. But eventually there's this woman who comes into the club and is still just shitty at him. Like, he's not an artist. He's just the waiter. And so he's like, hey.
She literally says, why is the busboy sitting at our table? Which I think is one of the greatest lines in the whole movie, because she's such an asshole.
Yep. And so he's like, hey, listen, like, why don't you come back to my place and pose for me, and I'll pay you whatever your rate is. And then he murders her, and he puts her in the clay, and he sort of presents her, and everybody is just like so fucking taken with this. And then there's another kind of thing that involves a severed head, but like the truth eventually sort of comes through when like there's an accident with one of the sculptures, and her body is revealed to be inside. And so like all of the people who were sort of his patrons chase him back to his place. And out of desperation, he hangs himself. He says, I'll hide in a place where they can never find me. And they said, he would have called this his final work, The Hanging Man.
Boo.
But this is like really kind of indicative of the AIP formula at the time. Cause
it is.
Cause was it Little Shop of Horrors that came first, or did they make that right off the back of this?
It's this. So the reason I chose this movie is because this is really when you start to see Corman come into his own. This is when you start to see AIP come into their own as well. This movie, so this is the first like real like horror comedy that anyone had ever made.
Right, because it's got a wicked sense of humor.
Yes, it's essentially a satire, and I think it really reflects a change in attitude, a change in humor in America. Like, so they were Corman and his friends. So this is Charles Griffith, and who would write a bunch of movies with him, writes your Deep Cut as well with him. They were like kind of part of that world, this hippie beatnik art world, which was a little bit started going on its way out.
Right. Cause like really, eventually like a few years later, like they're going, all of these people, all these beatniks are going to sort of morph into hippies.
And then into Republicans.
But yeah, at the time, like this was the whole thing. Is like they were most analogous to kind of like the whole hipster thing of the early, like the mid-aughts, right?
Ugh.
Yeah, I know, fucking disgusting.
So they make this movie, and right on the back of this, they make Little Shop of Horrors in 2 days. They write it and make it with the leftover sets from this movie. So there would be no Little Shop of Horrors without this movie.
Yeah, and it's wild too, because this movie, you could see that they're advancing their craft, but this movie still looks cheap as hell.
Oh yeah, this is made on 5 sets. There are only 5 sets in this whole movie. So Corman considers this part of a trilogy. This is the first movie in a trilogy that includes Little Shop of Horrors and Creature from the Haunted Cave, which is an absolutely horrible movie. It is like, and for anyone who's not that familiar, if you had ever watched a significant amount of Mystery Science Theater, you have seen some of these movies because a lot of them show up.
Yeah, like the sort of original run of Mystery Science Theater features a lot of AIP Corman movies. Yeah.
So they had done that. And what I think is kind of funny about this is that Dick Miller, who was sort of he was in like a bunch of like cowboy movies, he was like westerns. He was like kind of a bit player and stuff. But he knew he had met Corman and he was like, I think you'd be great for this movie. And he was like, all right, sure. Why the hell not? And then he does this and he was like, hey, we've got this other movie we're going to do right after this, Little Shop of Horrors. And he's like, here's the script. What do you think? And Dick Miller is like, this is basically the movie we just made, isn't it? And they were like, no, what are you talking about? He's like, this is the same character I just played. It's just a different name. And they were like, no. And he was like, look, I don't really want to play the same character again, which I think is pretty ironic for a guy who is mostly known for showing up in bit parts in movies playing a character named Walter Paisley.
Yeah. I mean, he had designs at the time. Like, he was going to be a big star.
And I watched an interview on the Bucket of Blood Blu-ray, the olive Blu-ray for it. There's an interview, and I think he's got to be in his 90s. It's like the year he died.
Yeah.
So probably 2019, I think. And he seems like such a nice guy.
I know, yeah, like, because in that Corman's World doc, he's like all over it, of course, and he just seems like a very pleasant man. Like,
he's another one who showed up and he was just like, no, I'm a writer. And they were like, yeah, we don't really need writers. And he was like, okay, then I'm an actor. And he was like, oh, an actor, you say? Well, I definitely need those. And like, that's how he gets into movies. And I will say, historically, I would have thought Dick Miller's not a great actor. And, watching this movie this time around, I thought Dick Miller's actually a pretty good actor.
Yeah.
Because there's a moment, this movie is mostly, it's a satire. It's a little bit goofy. They clearly, as much as they were a part of the beatnik scene, they didn't think much of it. I think they kind of thought it was a little bit of a joke in the art scene as well.
Right.
But there is a moment towards the end when, because what the whole story unfolds is like, Walter Paisley sort of buying his own bullshit eventually. And he thinks he's essentially Donald Trump. Like, he starts to believe that he is what everybody says he is. And he turns at a certain point and he starts to become kind of menacing, and he sells menace really well. Like, he comes because he's a bumbling dolt for most of this movie. But then at the end, you start to think, oh no, he's very capable of violence because he tries to kill the woman he loves when she sort of spurns his advances.
Yeah.
And there is a point where he flips, and it's sort of on his face. You see it, and it's a little bit unnerving to watch him do that, because he's played this kind of like goofy dumbass for most of the movie. He's like borderline kind of a Forrest Gump character, where he's like, he doesn't seem to get. You get a lot of like Lenny from Of Mice and Men kind of vibes. Like, he doesn't get that they're making fun of him a lot of the times. He doesn't get that he's not talented. And so, like, it's just it is this satire, it's this critique of the art world, but there are moments where it really does flip in that way that you're like, oh, I didn't see that coming. I don't think I like that.
Yeah.
But it's great. I mean, he's so good at it.
It's a real piece of like actual grand guignol, right? Like, it's this kind of naturalist look at this scene that like most people are going to be unfamiliar with, because like, even though they were kind of like, beatniks were sort of like a very brief kind of pop cultural thing, by this point, like, everybody is just kind of fucking sick of them. And like,
this is like classic Jack Kerouac, Neil Cassidy bullshit. Like, guys that are snapping when the poetry is done. It's that kind of like real stereotype kind of shit. Like, there's the one guy with like the big fucking beard who's like, I'm going to have a party for you tonight at the Yellow Door in honor of you, and I shall compose a poem.
Yeah, this whole thing is like I never repeat myself, because to repeat is death. And he's got like all these like just bullshit fucking polemics about like poetry and shit. It's really, really ridiculous. It does not have a very charitable view of these characters at all.
He's the same guy who's like, a bottle of Yugoslavian white wine. He's such an asshole.
I know. I saw that one actually for the first time at the kind of what remained of the Ioka Theater after it had been kind of snatched up, and the guy who bought it was trying to make something happen, and he was the dude that we met with that time, who was like, yeah, this midnight movie thing you guys want to do is bullshit.
And we said, look, no, wait, 20 years from now, it's going to be real.
And boy, we were right. Fuck that guy.
Yeah.
But yeah, he tried to do a thing where it was like he would show movies that were in the public domain, because apparently this is in the public domain.
Yep.
A lot of this stuff is, because he also showed Little Shop of Horrors the same night, and he also showed The Terror, because he did a triple feature that night.
Yeah, and so some of the reasons they're in public domain is like either they didn't think to copyright them, or film has sort of a different structure for copyright. So some of them like kind of cap out at like 50 years or 70 years or something like that.
All right, yeah. I kind of for a while, like I didn't really do too much digging into that. I sort of assumed that it was sort of like Night of the Living Dead, where it was just like, oops, kind of forgot to take care of some.
A lot of it is that. A lot of the ones that were really small at the time. I think a lot of the Republic picture stuff from the 40s was very similar, where they were like, copyright? What's that?
Yeah.
And I'm sure everybody around them was like, nothing. Right. Don't worry about it.
And nobody will steal my intellectual property. Yeah.
Yeah. But there is something to this movie that is, as much as it is a goofy satire, there is a sort of seriousness to it that you get a little bit more at the end than you do at the beginning. There's something kind of heartbreaking about it as well, because he is this sort of like, he's the classic quintessential underdog who just wants to be taken seriously, and he just wants to be successful. And he finds this way to do it, and he becomes so driven that really this whole thing is about this fear that they will take back a thing that he's been given. Like he sort of stumbles his way, accidentally killing the cat in a very hilarious moment. He, for some reason, stabs a knife into the wall.
Again, another It's Always Sunny reference. It's the whole cat in the wall. Now you're talking my language.
Like he accidentally does it, and he kind of stumbles into being what he had always wanted to be. And as much as I don't think they were going for a metaphor, but like, I think that's a lot of how a lot of people feel when they find some success. They're like, wait, I didn't earn this. This is just luck. Like, how did I luck my way into this? And there's that fear that it will be taken away from you. You kind of just happened into this, and it can so easily be taken away. And so the reason he keeps escalating to, what is kind of accidental, and then another accidental murder, into intentional murder, and then at the end he's just trying to kill this woman.
Yeah,
it's all sort of driven by this fear that they'll realize that he's actually not what he said he was, and they'll take away this thing that he has wanted for so long. And I don't know how intentional all of that is.
Yeah,
but it's there.
Like thinking about it, like there's no fucking way that they considered any sort of symbolism while they were making this movie. But me watching it, I'm like, okay, well, there's a whole thing here where all Walter Paisley wants to do is just be creative, like these people that he's kind of surrounded by. And in pursuit of that, he finds out that his art is death, which is really more about destruction than anything else. And so like that, I mean, that's a really kind of an interesting juxtaposition. Whether or not they meant it, they didn't. But there's also the fact that
I don't know that I would say that they did. I mean, again, this is at a time when there's a big shift in consciousness in terms of what people are thinking. People are being more educated on a much larger scale, and in terms of like university education and like pursuing higher degrees and things like that. So people are thinking more about this, and they're thinking more about the value of art and what art really means. And a lot of it's kind of like navel-gazing assholishness, but like there is an idea that there's more to life than what we were always told.
Yeah.
And so there's a little bit of that. And obviously I think I'm projecting some stuff onto this, and I'm reading a lot of what might not be there, but I don't think it's entirely unintentional. I think there's a little bit there where they're being a little kind of, tongue in cheek about it, but they are starting to realize like, oh, this whole Hollywood system is also kind of bullshit.
Yeah. Because there's also the notion of fragility in it, because like, not only is his lie is supported only as strongly as the sort of the shell of clay is, and like really his undoing comes as a matter of one of the sculptures actually breaking. And so like this
doesn't even break. She like accidentally wipes the clay away. It's like, bitch, you have to wait more than 24 hours.
I know. I mean, Jesus Christ, it's air dry clay. It's brand new. Like, give it a little time there, Walter. But yeah, I get that.
The sets in this movie are really incredible too. Like everything about it feels like it's like it's like pulled out of like a Bukowski poem
I know. Or,
by way of Dashiell Hammett
like,
in this weird way.
His apartment is like something out of fucking Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, you know?
Yeah.
It's
the bar,
crazy.
Like the restaurant they all hang out in. I don't know how much Dark Shadows you've watched, but like there's a bar in Dark Shadows that's called the Blue Whale. It looks exactly the same. It's like, oh, you guys just set up like a couple of tables and threw like a fucking, like those giant industrial spools of twine or whatever. Like, it's that where you're like, I don't know. Here's some plywood.
It's like it's like a 2-wall facade and like some folding tables and like some like pictures they got at Hobby Lobby or something like that.
Yeah. And now, so the art direction for this is done by a guy named Daniel Haller, who Haller would like, he worked with Roger Corman like through the 70s. He does, I think, all 4 of the movies we are talking about now. He might not do Death Race, but he does the other 3. Or the other 2. And so like he stuck with him. He was one of those like always work with this guy kind of people, because Daniel Haller knew how to like stretch a budget. You can fucking see it in this. The budget for this movie is $50,000.
Yeah.
And that's why it's like, well, you have 5 rooms and no decoration. Here's some fabric.
Yeah.
Make it work.
And they still came in on time, under budget.
Yep.
You know?
And it, like the Walter Paisley, I kept thinking while I was watching this, he has a real like Garth from Wayne and like Wayne's World vibe to him. Like I can almost hear him saying like, "Take you where? I'm low on gas and you need a jacket." Like he really has this like, he's oblivious in this kind of like endearing but also obnoxious way.
Yeah.
And most of this, because again, this is Charles Griffith who wrote it, and the direction is unremarkable. Corman moves the camera way too much.
He really does. Yeah, there's a real art, because eventually, like in the next movie that we talk about, is it's just a year later, and it's a humongous leap in terms of like craft. But like Bucket of Blood is a lot of fun, but it is an artless movie.
Yeah, but I think the reason I chose it is that it really marks the beginning of something. And I think you can see a lot of the themes and a lot of the ideas, they do carry through into the post-cycle movies that we're about to talk about. And I think it's fun. I think it really conveys his sense of humor and his kind of worldview. There's a little bit of kind of libertarian shittiness in it. There's a lot of judgment in it. But I think there's it feels a little bit like a John Waters movie, like an early John Waters movie, where you're like, this is rough as hell, but I see where you're going. And I think I will ride with you on this because I think it's going to be really interesting.
Right. Because let's talk about the next one, House of Usher.
Also mine.
Yeah, also yours. This was made in 1960. This is a fucking paradigm shift. It's like a massive leap forward in terms of just like the craft of filmmaking. This is the first of the AIP movies that they do with the whole Poe cycle. It's the very first one that they make with Vincent Price. It follows what?
The other movies in this. So for the people who are not familiar, the Poe cycle, it's over the course of I think like 4 or 5 years, they make I think 7 or 8
seven
movies.
of them they make. Yeah.
So
I think
there's
one
House
of them.
of Usher.
I think one of them's not even
one of them's not a Poe
movie. Not even a Poe movie.
So there's House of Usher, which is the first one. Pit and the Pendulum, Tales of Terror, Premature Burial, which is the one that's Ray Milland. It doesn't have Vincent Price in it. Then they make The Raven, The Haunted Palace, which is an H.P. Lovecraft story, but they were like, fuck it, good enough.
Close enough. But I mean, the thing is at that point in Lovecraft, he was still ripping off Poe really heavily. Yeah. So it may as well.
So then they make Mask of Red Death and then Tomb of Legia, which is not that good.
They do. I think Mask of the Red Death is one that I want to talk about as sort of like an honorary mention, because I think that's honestly like that's their last good Poe movie.
It's a really good movie.
Really good, yeah.
Yeah, it's dark as hell. And then Vincent Price also did, because these movies really kind of revitalized his career, because so this is at a point, another reason why Corman and AIP are really important here is that this is a pivotal time. Part of the drought in Hollywood has to do with the fact that so many of these huge Hollywood stars had really aged out. Like there weren't a lot of new people because the studio system had basically crumbled. Yeah. And so there weren't a lot of like new talent, and all of the like really big names were kind of aging out. They weren't that popular anymore. They couldn't play young people anymore. And Vincent Price was one of them. Like, he had started to kind of fall out of favor. Plus, he had been targeted by the House Un-American Activities Committee and had kind of been badgered out of work for several years. So these movies really, they revitalized his career. This sort of sets him on a path towards horror. And I mean, Vincent Price that was not his intention. He didn't love horror movies. He made the best of every situation he was ever in. And I think he liked having fun and he liked being an actor. And what these movies do for him is they let him feel like he is doing a big stage role. Like, it's the same reason why he loves Theater of Blood so much. And Theater of Blood is one of my favorite.
Yeah, it's probably one of my favorites also.
And it's, you know, they gives him this opportunity to play these big roles and to really feel like he's not kind of going the way of everybody else. And in reality, that's what they did. They propped him up, because he also made House of Wax a little bit before these.
Yeah.
And that also sort of sets, that's the one that really puts him on the path to horror. But these really kind of rebuilt him as an actor and gave him a new, a sort of new life for a younger audience. Because as much as we think like, oh, these people were huge stars, it wasn't like it is today. Like, if you didn't work back then, you didn't have any money.
Right. Yeah.
And so you would very quickly, because like, yeah, they would buy these big houses in like Hollywood Hills or whatever, but that was all kind of contingent upon them continuing to work. If they couldn't, they would lose all that shit almost immediately. So when he gets targeted by HUAC, that pretty much fucks him real hard.
Yeah. When did he do House on Haunted Hill? That had to be right around this time.
I think that's 59.
Okay, so yeah.
Because it's right after House of Wax. So it's like 50, I think it's 59, 58, 59. And, you know, he didn't love doing those. Horror did not have a good reputation. It was like kids' movies, essentially.
Right.
But there's something about him. And this is where these movies become really important for me, because it's, you know, horror, I think, obviously, historically, and even now, has been among other things, a very homophobic genre. And in a way that is maybe not as obvious, but it's very like hyper masculine. So, you know, when we're watching movies in the 70s and the 80s about, you know, these slashers and shit like that, it's very like, these are for a specific audience. And so to watch these movies, Vincent Price is so fucking campy.
He's arch in the extreme. Yeah.
And he did it in a way where it's like, he's not gay and he's not playing gay. But for me, then and now, to watch him is sort of like, I know that's not what he's doing, but I still recognize it. And it feels very familiar and it feels very welcoming and not empowering, but it's very validating in a way that nothing else in horror had been for me. To see him do this, it was very powerful to be like, I know that he's not me as a person and as an actor. He's a little bit me, but not much. But I know that he's also comfortable doing this. And that feels like, I feel like someone is okay with like, it doesn't feel hyper masculine. It doesn't feel, homophobic in that way that a lot of stuff did.
Particularly this one too. Yeah. I can see that.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. So let me give you the broad strokes of this one. Cause this is like, if you've never read The Fall of the House of Usher, this movie, unlike a lot of the other Poe adaptations that are to come, this one actually follows the original story pretty closely with a couple of little twists.
We should also say one of the reasons they also decided to go with these movies is that all of Edgar Allan Poe's work was in public domain, so they didn't have to pay for any licensing to anything. Yeah. They were like, okay, story's free.
So this one is about Philip Winthrop, who rides across this blasted wasteland to the house of the Usher family to see his fiancée, Madeline. But when he gets there, he's confronted by her brother, Roderick, who's played by Price, who forbids the union. And you see the Usher family lineage is cursed with madness and villains. And Roderick intends for their family to sort of die with himself and his sister. Winthrop conspires to steal his love away, but she suffers from these spells where she seems to be dead, but is actually just like in a really deep sleep. So thinking she's dead, Roderick has the butler entomb her in the family crypt. But being that she's not dead, she digs her way out of and strangles her brother while the house burns down around them. And Philip escapes with his life and watches the house of Usher sink into the swamp around them until it is no more. And that is pretty close to where the original story kind of ends up, right?
Yep.
Yeah, it's a really.
I mean, because Poe's stories are not that long.
No, they're quite short. They're very. I really enjoy Poe. Quite, like, I think he really is the shit. Even though, like,
there's a little bit of pearl clutching in there, but for the most part, like, if it comes down to it, if someone's like, well, you can have H.P. Lovecraft, this raging racist and anti-Semite, or Edgar Allan Poe, who basically just drank himself to death and was real sad all the time.
There is, yeah, like the word that comes up when you talk about these particular movies, and you talk about Vincent Price and the AIP Poe cycle, is macabre, and that is the word that is constantly sort of attached to Poe as well. This is not like in your face horror. It is this simmering sadness, a fixation on death that feels very Victorian.
And this is something that I think Corman understood that. He really got what Poe's doing. Richard Matheson really got it.
Yes. Oh, fuck.
Like,
I want to talk about Matheson for a second because he's one of my favorites.
There's a huge like, this is just 1 year later, and the upgrade is so remarkable because it is just like, it is light years ahead of what they're doing in A Bucket of Blood.
Yeah.
But like, everybody is on it. Everybody gets what, even fucking Les Baxter, who does the music. Les Baxter, if you don't know, he worked in film a lot, but he was also like a jazz musician, and he did a lot of like tiki torch jazz for white people. Now, I am one of those white people. I very much like Les Baxter. I'm not knocking him, but even he nails this fucking movie in a way that, like, just all the pieces fall right into place for this movie. Like, it is just, everybody is at their best. Maybe Vincent Price, Vincent Price is an incredible actor in just about everything. I think I've made my feelings about Vincent Price very, very clear over many episodes of this show. I am a very, very huge fan. He is very important to me.
Yeah. Also, most importantly with this movie is in color.
Yeah.
And I
think it was it might have been their first movie that they've done in color.
Yeah, and man, it is colorful. Like,
yeah, because I think he was like, so what Corman said was, I want to do this. I want to do it with Vincent Price, and I want it to be in color. And they were like, I don't know about color, because color film was pretty expensive.
Yeah, it was like when Technicolor came along and Wizard of Oz was like, we're going to crank this shit to 11. Like, it's like colorful on that level while still being quite morbid and morose.
Because they make so much use of their color in this. Like, there is some psychedelic shit in this movie that is so awesome.
Yeah. Oh my God. First of all, I would kill to have like 1-to-1 recreations of those portraits of the Usher family, because they are fucked up.
Those all went home with the actors, unfortunately, but
they got to be out there somewhere in like in a storage locker somewhere.
I mean, probably, well, Corman took the Vincent Price one.
Yeah.
I know that probably still exists somewhere.
That, you know what, we should conspire to heist these paintings from whoever has them.
They were done by a guy named Bert Schonberg, who's like an impressionistic painter.
They're so cool. They're so fucking cool.
I think he was like one of their friends. Like, he was part of the whole beatnik art scene. And I think they were just like, you'll do this for cheap. And he was like, what? Okay.
Yeah. I don't know if this is the first Richard Matheson, but like, for AIP at least, but like, this is like the first like really significant one that he'd been doing, because he'd been writing
probably
short stories up to this point. He'd written a bunch.
He wrote a bunch of Twilight
Zone, like some of my favorite Twilight Zone episodes. He
kept working on Twilight Zone while he did these too. But like, if anybody does not know who Richard Matheson is, he wrote I Am Legend, the movie that becomes Omega Man and Last Man on Earth. He wrote Haunting of Hell House, or is it just called Hell House? Yeah. Movie that is basically a ripoff of The Haunting, but it is extremely sexy in like a gross way.
Yeah.
He wrote a bunch of books. He wrote Stir of Echoes. It's really good. What's the Robin Williams one he made? They wrote the book as well.
Oh shit, I don't know.
He was a great writer. He's a really, really good sci-fi writer. He was he was part of that very like kind of humanistic, the earlier generation, like J.G. Ballard and Arthur Clarke, they were a little bit, I don't want to say autistic, but they were a little bit hands-off when it came to people.
You might call this stuff hard sci-fi. It was married a little more to the sort of the science than the fiction.
And it's a lot of like the real monster are people. It's like that kind of thing. Like he's really kind of human centered, whereas the previous generation was like it's old gods and it's also monsters, and you're like, oh god.
Yeah, he's got a really great short story. I mean, if you can, there's a collection out there just called I Am Legend that you should pick up that has the like original I Am Legend story. He's also got one called Dance of the Dead, which is my favorite one, which is the one that was adapted for Masters of Horror.
Masters of Horror, yeah.
But the like obviously the original short story is way better. It takes place in a really fucking strange like dystopia where they're able to sort of like reanimate a dead person for a little bit, and they kind of lurch around for the entertainment of all these people in a club. It's fucking crazy.
And I think, but again, that goes to what I was saying before about like, this is that shift in public consciousness about like, we're coming back to people, because I think there was that post-war era. These are the children of like World War II veterans, where it's like you grew up in this household where clearly something was wrong, but nobody was talking.
Yeah.
Now, we would go through 60 more years of that until we start to finally address it. But there is this feeling of like, I think maybe we're not as okay as we all keep saying we are. And that's what I think this stuff is starting to address. Like, that's why Matheson's stuff is all about people. And it's about loneliness. Like, what what is underlying everything in Last Man on Earth is he's lonely. He's terribly lonely. Yeah, there's like weird, I don't know, radioactive vampires or something.
Essentially, yeah.
But like the movie is really about how this guy is so lonely and desperate for people.
It has a really, really amazing ending. Like it has the twist of all twists.
Yeah,
which is.
But there's a twist.
Yeah, but I won't say that. Also, he wrote my favorite episode of The Twilight Zone. He wrote Nick of Time, which is that episode where. Shatner,
Burgess Meredith.
No,
Burgess Meredith.
No, Nick of Time is.
You're thinking of the bouncy head.
Yeah, that's the one where
devil.
Yeah, where
the devil.
Shatner and his wife are like obsessed with the fortune telling devil machine.
Yep.
Yeah, that's my favorite.
And so, like, I think he really understood like this story, because the way that Corman pitches this movie to Arkoff and Nicholson is so they're like, okay, so this is like a monster movie, and he's like, yeah, it's gonna be a monster movie. And they're like, I don't know, we've read this story, there's no monster. And he was like, oh, but there is. The house is the monster. And they were like, what the fuck are you talking about? And so
it's like like Shirley Jackson, you know that shit.
And they were like, oh, that fat lesbian? I don't think so. That sounds positively British. But like, I think they're starting to get like, this is a story about something else. And they really make it this weird, oddly era specific, like a psychedelic version.
Right. Cause like the way that
a gothic story.
Cause there is this whole thing going on where it's like, it's very gothic. It's a character story. There's only there's 4 actors in it. And a third of the budget went to Vincent Price, apparently, out of a $300,000 budget. But
worth it.
But like at the same time as all of this, like this is just this, this gothic melodrama is happening around them. Like the house is very much sort of manifesting itself as the monster, because there's a lot of like weird shots of the house and strange angles, and it kind of creaks and kind of growls on its foundation, because the whole thing is eventually the house is literally coming apart, and that's what happens at the end of the story. Yeah, it's
now I'm not gonna say that they really deliver on that. I'm not sure that they
do as best as they can within the limits of their budget.
Yeah,
because like,
so as you're saying, this is the first one that Corman doesn't do everything on. Like, so he's not doing cinematography on this. He's not. Incidentally, David Crosby's father is the cinematographer on this movie.
No shit.
Yeah, Lloyd Crosby. This one he does. I think he did all the Poe movies with them. But like everybody, there's enough money, and it's only like, it's like, I think it's less than 300,000. I think it's like 275 or something, and they give 100 of it to Vincent Price, who deserved it and earned it, and. He really wanted to do it as well, not just because he needed work, but also because, I think it appeared interesting to him. I will say, in 1080, there are certain moments where it's like, whoever did the makeup on this maybe wasn't on their game. Because there are times when, like, Vincent Price looks like a proper tart.
It's the hair. because it's like it looks like they like bleached it with peroxide.
They did bleach it.
Yeah.
They did, because he wanted. So they're supposed to be twins. What's her name? Is it Fahey? Margaret Fahey? Myrna Fahey. Okay. She's the one who plays Madeline Usher, and they're supposed to be twins, but like he's a good 15 to 20 years older than she is.
I was gonna say, yeah.
And so they like bleach his hair to try to make him. I mean, he looks fantastic.
Yeah, because like the very first time I'm watching this, I'm like, holy shit, is that a surprise? Because I couldn't.
He's a very good looking man to begin with. He's very handsome, very striking man. He's very tall.
Oh, yeah.
But, like, pictures
of Vincent Price in his youth are startling. Like, he is a specimen.
And he's so, like, he embodies this role in such a strange way, because the character is supposed to be a little fidgety, like a little like everything. He's kind of at his wit's end all the time. He's like last nerve, everything's frayed. And so he plays him like he's startled by the slightest thing, but then he'll take up the lute and just start plucking away on it. And so like part of the story is that like they have this like hypersensitivity to like senses, essentially, like sound and
light and
all of that. Yeah. And then he'll just like grab a lute and start strumming away on it. And I'm like, really?
It's a gentle instrument.
Yeah, that's definitely not. It's
yeah, no, it's a fucking hell of a movie. Like after I watched that, I was like, shit, I should have probably claimed this one as my favorite.
Yeah, they do really downplay the incest. There's a pretty heavy incest subplot in the story. Yeah. Or at least it's very heavily implied. There's something incestuous going on because they are such a sort of cloistered family. But I don't think they do away with it entirely in this movie. I think it is still there.
It's an unspoken condition
because he is very contemptuous of like this guy who shows up to steal his sister away. And again, this is Daniel Haller who's doing art direction on this. And he does a really great job because they shot this, I think, over 3 weeks, and most of it is a sound stage. But it's set dressing in a way that's like a really good college play production. Like it's kind of that where it has
the main kind of hall set that they really make use of is like cavernous. It's massive.
Yeah. Because it's a huge set.
Yeah.
Mark Damon's the Winthrop. He's fine.
Yeah.
He went on to do like a bunch of Italian stuff.
Yeah.
But this is, again, it's that upgrade from A Bucket of Blood, because Corman makes so many smart decisions in this. Like, there's a lot of melodrama, but it could have gone so much worse. Like they could have leaned in really, really hard, like Tennessee Williams style melodrama. Yeah. And they don't. Like he kind of keeps it pretty tightly reined in a way that's like there is an undercurrent of unease to the whole thing, and that could have tipped real easily.
Yeah, it's as close as you can get, like a perfect execution of an Edgar Allan Poe adaptation. Like just because really, like the stories themselves, Poe, are not terribly scary. But it's like what I said, there is just this kind of carrier tone that runs throughout the whole thing. It's got this like miserable buzz that
there's a lot of like, did you know, my friend, that we will all die one day? It's that.
And
then my friend, you die.
And then but it's got a lot of that. It contains that perfectly. It's really great.
There's this towards the end, there's a dream sequence towards the end that it starts to tread real close to Dark Shadows territory in that like soap opera-y way, but it's kind of to imply like Winthrop has this dream. It's like something about this whole scenario is not right. Like because she's still alive, and I think for a slightly less sophisticated audience, which they would have been in 1960, it really works because otherwise I'm not sure how you would have sold that. And so it as much as like it comes across as a little bit cheesy now, in the moment, it's probably like, yeah, you needed, like the audience maybe needed a little bit of hand holding to be like, but wait, she's not really dead.
Yeah.
And so they do it via this dream sequence, but eventually the dream sequence starts to like slide into this other psychedelic kind of dream sequence that starts to feel real, kind of like Kenneth Anger. It's not Rabbit in the Moon. What's the one about the Kenneth Anger movie with the fabrics, the dresses? I can't remember the name of the movie. It's Puce, something in Puce. It doesn't matter. It has a very sort of psychedelic feeling to it because they're using all these like light gels and the makeup as all the people, it's Winthrop sort of walking through up to the coffin to realize that she's not dead. And the makeup is very like Carnival of Souls, like just a little bit of blacking under the eyes, but it's so effective in this bizarre way because you're like, this is starting to feel a little bit unnerving with all the like weird gelled lights and the fog machine is really working overtime.
Yeah, this, like, billowing fog machine with like, but it's also like very color heavy fog too.
Yeah, it has a kind of Bava feel to it. Like it's that like pre Argento Italy style. I mean, I could have done without the obnoxious wailing from everybody, but
yeah.
Otherwise, like it felt like the kind of thing because Myrna Fey's maybe not. She's sort of the one who kind of falls flat in this movie.
Yeah.
This would have been great for like Barbara Steele. Would have been really good in this.
Hazel Court would have been pretty.
Yeah. But otherwise, like it's such a strange, like it's a way to take this gothic story and they kind of really bring it into the 60s by being like, but hey, we can't say that everybody's on drugs, but we can kind of make it look like they are, right?
Look, it's Poe, but it's groovy Poe.
Yeah, it's just like, this is what it looks like when everybody's firing on all cylinders, and it's just cool as hell to watch it happen.
Yeah, it works like crazy. It's a fucking fantastic movie, man. Like, I can't get over that one.
And this sort of launches everybody, because like, this movie is very, very successful. It was pretty well received critically. I think people thought Vincent Price was very good in it because Vincent Price is very good in it. I mean, everybody else is sort of like, yeah, they're fine. They're not why you're there.
No. It's a Vincent Price movie through and through.
Yeah. And so they were like, AIP was like, oh, this is, I think, very successful. Let's make 9 more of them or whatever. And they just they launch right. Like they're making 1 or 2 of these a year.
Yeah. And speaking of another one of those, this is sort of like my main pick is The Raven is mine. And this has been probably my favorite since, like, I don't know if you remember it. Do you remember when we drove to Toronto?
Yes.
And Dad brought like that. He brought that like that converter to sort of like be able to like power a VCR on like a little TV, because this was one of the movies that we watched because that was like a 10-hour drive, as I recall. Yep. And like this movie really stuck out because it was another one of those ones where I was like, it's an old movie. And then
this is one of my favorite movies. This is my other favorite.
And then he put it on and I was like, this is fucking amazing. This is one of the funniest fucking things I've ever seen. And it's very silly. And this is one of the reasons why I like it, is because by contrast to House of Usher, this movie is utterly ridiculous. Yeah. This is just, it is off the rails almost immediately.
And so where this one comes out of is they had made, what comes before Tales of Terror? Yeah. I think it's the one that comes right before this. And one of the segments in Tales of Terror is a comedy segment. And Matheson really liked writing comedy for this sort of style. And for anyone who's not familiar with The Raven, it's a pretty short narrative poem.
It's not.
It's just about a guy kind of freaking himself out.
Yeah. It's a typical Poe character who is longing for his lost love. She died, and like it's all he can think about. And there's just this fucking bird that's messing with him the whole time, and it just kind of drives him crazy. That's it. That's the story. I think it's like it happens across like 5 pages, and that's it. And
so Matheson was like, "What the hell am I supposed to do?" Because they had made another. There's a version of this movie with Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi. Again, it's a similar thing where it's like, here's your framework, but also the movie has to be something else because there's literally nothing to this poem.
Yep.
And so Matheson was just like, what the fuck am I supposed to do? And he was like, well, I liked writing that comedy one. Maybe I'll make another goofy story. And he does. And they were so successful, reviving people like Peter Lorre and Basil Rathbone and Vincent Price. They were like, let's do it again.
Yeah, this one is like a fucking all-star feature. Best Raven adaptation, by the way, is The Simpsons.
Yes.
But yeah, like this one's got Vincent Price again, because of course it does. It's got Boris Karloff, it's got Peter Lorre, it's got Jack Nicholson, who is almost unrecognizable in this role because he's so young at the time.
I just don't like Jack Nicholson.
I can take him or leave him. I don't care. I don't really think he's like. I don't think he's the.
He has got one speed.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really give a shit about Jack Nicholson. I don't get the appeal at all.
Nope.
No. But this was in '63. Again, written by Richard Matheson.
Incidentally, they do, right after they make this, they do A Comedy of Terrors, which is one of my favorite AIP movies, which is basically just this again. It's just but with a slightly different story.
It's just like classic actors hamming it up. Oh, and a thing about these movies that really kind of has to be mentioned is because unlike a feature, like typical feature movies, these movies are all pretty short. Like I think A Bucket of Blood is a touch over an hour.
Mm-hmm.
The House of Usher, I think, is probably the longest out of all of them, minus Death Race. I think at about 80 minutes. This one is like almost 80 minutes long. Like they're reasonable. Like you can really clip through these movies pretty quickly if you want to catch up with them.
I think the one I watched is I have the Arrow release of this, and I watched it was probably like an hour and a half, maybe a little bit less.
Yeah, I got that. I got that Scream Factory collection of Vincent Price movies. I think.
So good.
Yeah, highly recommended because it also comes with like a ton of fucking awesome like archival stuff and some radio plays as well, I believe. But yeah, this movie also, I mean, in reference to House of Usher, this movie makes wide reuse of the burning house footage that they shot for House of Usher as well.
Yeah, because they were like, look, that cost us. That was the other third of the movie.
Yeah.
So God damn it, you're gonna make good use of that one.
Yeah. So here's the broad strokes of the story. So Dr. Craven, who's played by Vincent Price, is mourning the loss of his dear Lenore. He's visited in the night by a talking raven that turns out to be a fellow wizard named Dr. Bedloe. And everybody in this movie is a doctor of some sort. And together they put together.
Well, they're a doctor of wizards.
Yeah, it's like fucking Harry Potter shit.
You're a wizard, Peter Lorre.
And so they put together a potion that turns him back into a human. And he explains, and good God, this fucking plot is so convoluted. And he explains that he has a beef with yet another wizard named Dr. Scarabus. And Dr. Bedloe conscripts Craven to go to Scarabus's castle so he can get his revenge.
And like the whole thing, their whole like rivalry. It's a one-sided rivalry, Peter Lorre's character. And it's basically because Dr. Scarabus, they had like a duel and he beat him, like outright handily beat him. And he was like, well, he cheated. He didn't let me use my, whatever his super ability. Like, it's basically just like, I lost, so he cheated.
Yeah,
like that's the whole basis of their argument.
And the whole thing also, like, I mean, the sort of the main thrust of the comedy during this part is that it's Peter Lorre voicing this raven who's talking like not in kind of like the sort of English you would expect from this. It's all very like modern vernacular and like a lot of slang at the time and shit. He's
also a bit of a drunk.
He is, and I get the feeling he really is drunk throughout the whole way.
So Peter Lorre did a lot of ad-libbing throughout this, a lot of improvisation, which drove Boris Karloff fucking crazy because Boris Karloff is of a different era, and so he was just like very serious. He had a good sense of humor, but like we show up, we do our role as it has been written. And that is how we make movies. And Peter Lorre was like, that's not how I make movies, Karloff. Get out of my way.
That's not how we do it in Germany. Yeah. So all is not on the up and up. It turns out that Craven has a particular sort of magic that Scarabus wants. It's like with gestures and like waving his hands around and shit. And the whole Raven thing was a plot to bring him to the castle so Scarabus could steal his secrets. Also, Lenore is not dead. She faked her death so she could turn Team Scarabus.
Yeah, she's a real bitch.
Which is a fucked up thing to do because, man, Dr. Craven is just longing for her in that
I've got some thoughts on that we'll get to at the end.
Yeah. And so now, with everybody in his power, Scarabus threatens to torture Craven's daughter if he doesn't give up the magical secrets. They end up having a big magical duel with crazy animated special effects and fire. And then Craven wins and rejects all the people who betrayed him.
There's something. So this is 1963. And Vincent Price plays this as like, oh, my dear little, he plays it like he plays in the poem. And at the end, he's just kind of like, she's just like, well, don't forget about me. And he's sort of like,
fuck you, babe.
Fuck you. I gotta go.
Yeah.
You can stay with this old hack.
Yeah.
Like, it's pretty great. So I think the humor of this movie is still, it still works. Like, it's goofy. It's real. It's like some slapstick shit, but like this is one of those ones. I think they get away with a lot because of the sort of comedy format, where like things can look a little cheap, acting can be a little hammy. They can be like really leaning into all that, and you don't care because you can tell everybody except for maybe Boris Karloff is having a really good time.
Yeah, yeah, and that's my favorite Vincent Price is when he's hammy and when he's in on the joke and really seems to be having fun, because like that's him on Batman for sure.
Well, that's him. Like I think that's the Vincent. Unless you are, if you are a giant fan such as myself, who has really probably seen all of his movies, the Vincent Price that is a campy, hammy Vincent Price. He is in fact a very good actor.
Yeah. He really he reminds you of that on his very last picture when he's in Edward Scissorhands. Like that is a heartbreaking role, even though it's very short for him.
Yeah, he was a fantastic actor and a wonderful stage actor, but he kind of got thrust into these movies, and the way that made it, I don't want to say tolerable because that makes it sound like he didn't appreciate it and didn't enjoy himself, but like the way that he really kind of found a way to embrace it was, okay, I'm just going to have fun. Because I think a lot of the time, people like Corman were like, just have fun with it. Like, we're just here to make this dumbass, goofy movie. Let's all have fun. Now, Karloff was having a little bit less fun, partially because he was quite a bit older than everybody else. He was in not great health. He couldn't walk very well. So he was in a lot of pain. Like, that's why you see him sitting in this movie a lot. Yeah. Or like, there's a lot of like when he isn't sitting, he's like standing and pontificating, but he's not walking very often because it was very hard for him to walk. And that probably contributed to why he was a little bit irritable, because he really didn't get along with Peter Lorre, which is weird because Peter Lorre was not that much younger than him.
No. Like, I mean, like they were both like kind of in their prime at the same exact time, just like,
yeah. Cause M is late 30s, mid 30s?
Yeah, like late.
And that's kind of that's like his big breakout.
Yeah. Yeah. Like at the same time that Karloff was doing.
That movie is haunting as fuck.
It's a mess. It's a really fucking good movie.
You will feel bad about everybody.
But yeah, like he was doing that at the same time that Karloff was doing Frankenstein movies. So
he's probably like a little bit younger maybe, but not that much younger, but I think he was sort of like, fuck it. This isn't Casablanca. I'm here to have fun. And he really kind of did.
Oh, yeah. Like he spends a portion of the movie in a like man-sized Raven suit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this movie, the way that we are describing it, if you've never seen it, you're probably like, this movie sounds dumb as shit. It is not. This is a fantastic film because it's, I think I said something about this. I don't know if it was the last episode. I don't remember what the movie was, but like when I'm willing to be I'm so much more on board when you can tell that everybody's having a good time. I think it was the Troll.
Yeah, when we talked about Troll. We talked about
this. It's like Troll is a huge piece of shit as a movie, but like I am willing to just sort of be there for it if everyone's just kind of having an okay time making the movie. And this is that to the greatest extent, where it's just like everybody is having fun with the exception mostly of Boris Karloff.
But even he like that. You might be overselling that a little bit because he's not.
Well, he was very uncomfortable through most of it.
But you would not know that by watching the movie
because he was a consummate professional.
Yeah. Yeah, and he's also a very colorful character. Like this is not a movie where like Vincent Price spends the whole time just hamming it up and stealing every scene. Like everybody gets a little bit of the action, and Boris Karloff definitely gets a bit of the action too. Like he's like his character. He's the bad guy, but like he's barely a bad guy. He's barely a bad guy here.
No, he's more like he's like a put out guy.
like
he's like yeah, I stole your girlfriend, but she showed up at my door.
Yeah, she fucking faked her death to come be with me, bro.
Yeah, like he's sort of like, I guess I'm the bad guy by default.
Yeah, it's just its entire appeal. It basically it's in color also. But I mean, from the point of House of Usher on, I think they're just AIP is just all color, but it's colorful in the same way that House of Usher is. It's just the vibe is way different. Even the sets look the same. Like it's really huge, cavernous, sort of like Gothic castles and stuff like that.
Because again, I mean, it's here's Haller doing that thing again, where it's like, I'm going to make the most of this sort of like pittance you've given me. They've got like these big ass fucking dragon statues breathing fire the whole time. Like it's very clearly on a set, but they're making so much of this set. Like there's exterior shots where it's raining and shit, and you're like, this is great. I would watch this forever. And I don't know why, like, I watch these movies and they feel so much better to me than when I watch something. Someone was just like, oh, did you see? I saw the TVs glow. I'd be like, get the fuck out of my house. I hate you.
I know. I
haven't seen that movie. I shouldn't slander it.
I know. I'm a little interested in that one, so I'm definitely going to.
But you know what I mean. Like I watch this and it's just like, this is craftsmanship.
That's the thing that gets me.
There's a difference between them, but like, there's so much here where they were like, we're just fucking breaking new ground left and right. Let's just do this and have a great time.
Yeah, that's the thing that gets me is I work with somebody who's also like a horror movie fan, but he's very much into like the modern stuff. And so he knows that I do the pod and he listens to episodes every now and then, but like I have a really hard time sort of engaging with this person because like I sort of keep up with modern horror movies. This is sort of a matter of principle because, we do this whole thing, but like, this is really where my heart lies. And so I have a really hard time kind of connecting with people who are disconnected from this sort of part of the history.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, it makes me feel old at times because like, but I mean, even by that standard, like this shit predates me by a considerable margin. I think
I was saying something like this to Michael the other day is like, I think what separates me, because I too have that sort of resistance to, like, people are like, oh, did you see the new Omen movie? And I'm like, nope, probably won't either. Not for any particular reason. I'm sure it's fine. I don't know.
I'm just not as motivated to see that.
Yeah,
stuff.
I probably will get around to seeing it, but this is a lot like, when there was no internet, we really had to dig to find these things. And if you really love something, like the way, and this is probably, I don't know if it's obviously not just me, but like, this is how I operate, is that if I really love something, I want to know all that there is to know about it. And I want to know where it all comes from. And so I dig and dig, that's how you end up, you like the Misfits, and that's how you find your way back to bands like the New York Dolls and the Seeds. And like, you just keep digging and digging to always find out how this thing has evolved to be what it is. And the more I go back, the more I see, like, do I love A Bucket of Blood? Not really, but I love watching it to see like, oh, this is sort of where all this shit starts. It's like this humor, this kind of tongue-in-cheek horror evolves from this movie. Is that my favorite Roger Corman movie? No, but it seemed the best one to start.
Yeah.
And when I see people, and again, this is going to sound real get off my lawny, and I understand that, and I accept it. I fully accept this. But like, when I see people going on and on about how they love horror, and I'm like, yeah, but all you keep mentioning is It Follows and The Witch. Do you have any interest in knowing all of the things that came before all of those movies that I assure you are better? And the answer is usually no, because there's not someone there to hand it to them. And I don't mean that as like you kids these days are lazy. It's just like, I mean that in a way that's like, please go back, please dig deeper, because as much as things like It Follows, that is a good movie. And The Witch, well, I have different feelings about The Witch, but like, these new movies, they're not bad films, but like, these people are also influenced by other, like, keep going back, keep digging. You will find more that you love that is so much better and so much richer. And if you still think that those are the sort of be all end all, great. But at least you took the time to learn about it, because this shit is so fucking cool. And I think if you really love something, you should find out as much as you can about it.
Yeah.
And that's my rant.
No, it reminds me of like when I was working at the record store and there's a girl who came in and she's like, I heard that you're like the horror movie person to talk to. And I was like, I suppose, yeah. And she's like, what's like
And you said, well, you can ask my brother, but he's probably been drinking.
I was like,
I was a real great employee and I was the one in charge.
No, she was like, so like what's good? Like what's good? And I was like, oh, that's a fucking very broad question. Like, what do you like? And the Hitcher remake had just come out. And she was like, I saw the Hitcher and I loved it. It's like the best movie I've ever seen. And I was like, oh God, like inside I'm withering. And I was like, okay, well,
you said, I don't know how to answer your question now.
I was like, well, I was like, have you ever seen the original? And I took her back to the thing and she was like, this looks like an old movie. And I went, well, it was made in like 1986. And she was like, oh yeah, no, thanks. I won't watch that. And I was like, you have 10 seconds to get out of my store.
Well, see, that's the problem though, is like when you put limitations on yourself like that. Like I remember when I started dating the last person I dated for a very long time, one of the first things he said, because obviously if anybody knows me in real life, you know it takes about 5 seconds for me to tell you everything that I love in the world. I will tell you all of it upon meeting you because I'm a giant fucking nerd. But I remember I was like, here, I love everything. And he was like, oh, movies in black and white. I was like, yeah. And he was like, I don't really like black and white movies. And I find putting those sort of like restrictions on yourself, I don't understand it. It seems so arbitrary. And I know a lot of it just comes because it's like, this is unfamiliar to me.
Yeah.
And I get that. Like sometimes there's a lot of times where I'm just like, I'm not in the mood to watch a movie in French, or I'm not in the mood to watch a movie that's in Japanese. Sometimes I'm just not in the mood for it. But like when I do, I'm just like, fucking snap out of it. You want to watch this movie. And then I do it. I'm like, thank God I did. Because I have never seen anything like the first time I saw House, again, a movie that we recently talked about, like, I was like, I have never seen anything like this in my life.
There's nothing like that movie.
And I want to see more. Now, there is nothing else like it because, Jesus Christ, I can't imagine a world in which two of those exist. But like, as I push myself to get into new genres of film and to start exploring different styles of filmmaking, start looking at, the Yakuza movies and sort of the Shogun style stuff from Japan and like Ingmar Bergman, like you're opening yourself up to so many different things. And so when you're like, oh, it's old, especially when it's like, that's from 86.
Yeah.
It's like the time, I can't remember what the thing was. It was an episode of Morbid. And, Bridget was telling me like, oh, people on the internet. And I'm like, well, I don't really care what people on the internet say about what I wrote. But she was like, it was a thing that happened in like 75, and someone was like, oh, it's an old timey case. And she was like, excuse me, I was alive when that happened.
Yeah. The morbid old timey obsession is one that I get a kick out of. I guess it's become a thing over there.
Yeah. And my response to that is always like, I'm sorry, are they any less dead because it happened 100 years ago? But like, that's the thing is like, it's not just because it's 40 years old and you have a little bit of trouble sort of resonating with this thing. Take the time because you will come away a better person with a richer understanding of either a genre or of film more broadly. It's so worth the investment. And these movies, and this is again why the reason I'm going off like this is because these movies are so important to me because they were friends at a time at various times when I have felt very lonely. And I think that it's always worth pushing to find new things. And and there's, it's not just in the present. There's so much shit that has happened. Just keep going back.
Oh, yeah.
And it's really worth it.
Yeah. I mean, like, I don't really understand incurious people. Like, I can't, I have a very hard time, like, connecting with somebody who's just not interested in anything. I don't know. It's weird. But
and I don't want to sound overly critical of that because I understand like there's especially now when you're like we live in this I don't participate that much in social media and that is on purpose because I find it very overwhelming and I find it very sad a lot of the time. But like I get if your life is very much online, especially if you're younger and your world is very much online, you just have people throwing shit at you all the time and you have no idea where it's coming from. And so it's very easy to just be like, oh, okay, this sounds good. I'll watch this. Like the incentive is not so much there.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to sound like I'm just like, you kids these days don't understand what's valuable. No, like your shit is valuable too, just because I don't understand it or I'm not that interested. You know, all these new movies, that's great too. But like, don't let that be the only thing. So I guess I don't want to come across as though I'm being like, you fucking lazy bastards don't know what's really cool. I guess what I really want to get at is like, there's other cool shit too. Don't let that be the only thing just because it's the thing that's in front of you in a world that is very overwhelming and that is constantly throwing things at you.
Yeah. Well said.
No, thank you.
Yeah. Well, let's bring this over the finish line, shall we?
Oh,
we'll wrap this up.
okay.
This is my deep cut, even though it's not really a deep cut. This is a movie that like a lot of people have seen.
This was going to be mine as well because I also love.
We're going to round this one out with 1975's Death Race 2000. Which is not an AIP movie, and this is of the 4 movies that we talked of. It's the only one that's not directed by Corman. This is directed by Paul Bartel.
Yes, and he also did some of the writing on the script. And there are moments in this movie for those who do not know who Paul Bartel is. He is an openly gay director. He did a lot of theater.
If you've ever seen a movie with Mary Warnoff, he's not far away from her.
No, and she has some real shitty things to say about him a bunch of times where I'm like, God damn it. Like, you guys, I thought you were friends. I think he probably thought you were friends too until now.
Oh, yeah.
But you can tell that this movie is partially written by and directed by a gay man.
Yeah. But also, this was shot by a guy named Tak Fujimoto. Which kind of blew my mind because this is a guy who he worked on Star Wars. He shot The Silence of the Lambs. I mean, and The Sixth Sense, to name just a few movies. Like Silence of
the Lambs was also there's a Corman connection there as well.
Yeah, Corman's in that movie. Yeah, fucking great. Let's break this one down. I mean, if you've never seen,
this is a weird one too, though, because this is
it's not. First of all, it's not a horror movie.
Nope. Paul Chihara did the soundtrack to this. I don't know if you know who he is.
I don't know that one.
He's a classical musician, but he did a bunch of soundtracks. I got something recently from him called Prince of the City, which is a movie I'd never heard of. The soundtrack is cool as hell, though. Like, it's super good. He did Fire in the Sky.
Oh, shit. That's awesome.
He did Dark Secret of Harvest Home as well. The Betty Davis TV movie. It's based on what the fuck is his name? Book. It's a good book. I can't remember the guy's name. I would say he dated Cal Culver in the 70s. That means nothing to you. But anyway, yeah, this like Sylvester Stallone is in this movie.
It's got a great cast. It's got Martin Kove is in this also, like
briefly, but yeah.
Who else is in it? So we got
Mary Warnoff's in it.
Mary Warnoff is in it. She's, what the fuck is her name? Oh, she's Calamity Jane. And that's right. And all the racers have really funny names. There's Sylvester Stallone plays Machine Gun Joe. There's a Nazi racer named Matilda the Hun.
Yeah.
And I can't believe that we slept on this in our New Year's Eve Evil episode. The yappy woman that the killer picks up in the bar and then sort of drives around with, she's Machine Gun Joe's navigator.
Yep.
And also,
who I think she's fantastic in this.
She's hilarious.
And the fact that she didn't have like a bigger career, like she was in a bunch of shit, but like it really should have been bigger. Like she's got kind of like a Lonnie Anderson energy, but like a little peppier and brighter.
Yeah. And I mean, like the headliner of the whole thing is David Carradine.
This is a man who really rode nepotism harder than anybody I've ever seen because much like Jack Nicholson, David Carradine has one speed, and that is Kane from Kung Fu. He's going to do it for 40 years, and it is not very good.
No. Boy, good God.
He is super flat, and he plays the same fucking character and everything. And I like him. Like, I think he's fine. He's great in this, but like, he just does the same thing because he's in Death Sport, which is basically just this again the next year.
Right. So here's the basic story of this. So it's the year 2000, as the name implies. The United States exists as a fascist dystopia under a despotic regime. Remarkable that keeps the rabble distracted with a series of violent road races. And this movie concerns the Transcontinental Road Race, which pits 5 colorful racers against each other in their ridiculous cars. And then the most exciting racer in the bunch is a guy named Frankenstein, who may or may not have all these like replaced body parts. Like his whole thing, the reason they call him Frankenstein is because he's supposedly all of his parts have been like replaced.
And they sort of commit to that, and then they don't, and then they do again.
Yes. And so the whole thing is they race across the country from New York City to New Los Angeles and win points for running people over. Now, meanwhile, there's a resistance army that schemes to undo the entire thing, and they insinuate one of their agents into the race as Frankenstein's navigator, while agents of the rebels stash bombs, landmines, and Looney Tunes contrivances along the path of the race. But it turns out that Frankenstein is perpetrating a scheme of his own and intends to kill the president upon winning the race. And in that time, there's a lot of nudity. There's a ton of bloody violence because the whole
hilarious bloody violence.
Yeah, and the thing is, like the shift from AIP to New World Pictures really kind of creates a very like it's the shift is jarring because almost immediately the movies that Corman's producing are extremely violent. In sexual in ways that AIP pictures are not.
Because Arkoff and Nicholson were a little bit older and were a little bit more wary of like running afoul of the censors. In the 70s, though, grindhouse theaters are you could be even if you made anything, it didn't matter. There was a place to show it. Like and he sort of presages of the VHS market as well.
Yeah, and also this is sort of the twilight years of the drive-in, but there were still a lot of drive-in theaters that you could run these movies, and they actually expected these kinds of cheap, shitty, like just crap movies to sort of run on the backside of an A picture. Like the whole reason that you call a movie a B picture is because in a drive-in double feature, the B picture was almost always something garbage.
It's the B side of the record.
Yeah.
If the A side is the single, the B side is the B side.
Yeah. And so
that's why it's called the B picture.
Yeah. And so like in the 70s, starting in the 70s and in moving into the 80s until like he kind of moves away from New World, like you get movies like this that are just like way more explicitly violent and sexual. Like really kind of peaking with Humanoids from the Deep, which is really
not a good movie.
Really kind of an upsetting monster movie.
It's sleazy in a way that you're like, I don't like this.
Lots and lots of rape in your Mutant Fishman movie.
Fish rape, I guess. Yeah. But like the market logic is the same as AIP though, where it's nobody gives a shit what the second movie is because theoretically and heteronormatively, you're supposed to be otherwise engaged by that point.
Yeah.
Like that's essentially the logic. Like I'm being a little bit, cheeky about it, but like that is essentially the logic where it's like, you're not really here to watch a movie. If you really wanted to see a movie, you'd go to the movie house to see it. You're at a drive-in for a different social experience. And that's why whatever the second movie is, or depending on whatever the order is, doesn't really fucking matter what the movie is, because that's not really why you're there.
No, like here's an example. Like when one of my like formative movie-going experiences is when Dad took us all to see The Empire Strikes Back. This is before you, actually. Or was it? But anyways, point being, we went to see it at a drive-in theater, and so Empire Strikes Back, humongous fucking sensation of a movie. It's coming off the back of like one of the biggest sci-fi movies of all time. The B picture for that drive-in was that Japanese one, Message from Space, which is the one with like flying pirate vessels in space and like a lot of, I think Ishiro Honda worked on that one. It's like it's a Toho movie, but it's a really
I love Ishiro Honda.
Really fucking weird Toho movie, yeah. And Dad was pissed off and he drove off before we could finish it. I loved it.
But like for people who have never been to the drive-in, which probably most people at this point, like picture the scene in Greece when they go to the drive-in. It's basically that. Like you're not like you can barely hear it. Like
or Blood Rage.
Or kind of Blood Rage, but like, even in the 90s when we would go to the drive-in, like you're listening on your car radio, so it kind of sounds like shit.
At this time, it was even worse. This was the time where you would like take the little
you'd hang it in your car.
Yeah, and it was essentially like a little sound unit that you would just sort of like dangle off of the inside of your car door, and that was the movie audio that you had to go by.
Yeah, so I mean, like the point is like, you're not there to see the movie. So nobody really cares if these movies are bloody as hell or they have a ton of fish rape in them or whatever. Like, it doesn't fucking matter. Like, that's why you can get away with really sleazy, slimy shit at Grindhouse movies, because it's like the only people who are there to fuck or sleep.
Yeah.
That's about it.
Yeah. But like, back to the point of the movie, like the reason that I love this movie as much as I do is because it is, like the other ones, utterly fucking ridiculous.
Oh, this movie is super nihilistic in the best way.
It's essentially, I can't remember. I would imagine that Rollerball came out around this time.
Well, I was going to say, like, this is coming off of Rollerball. This is coming out, like, if you were to say, I wonder if the Italians made a version of this, I would have said, yes, they did. It is called New Barbarians, and it is garbage. But also in kind of a fun way. Yeah, this is a dystopian movie. It's very 70s dystopian too, because like this period of time, there's a lot of these kind of very nihilistic, like this is what the future will look like. And were they wrong? Not really.
No, they just got it all wrong on the fashion sense. But like everything kind of looks like Logan's Run. Everything kind of looks like.
Well, so that was going to be my other reference, is Logan's Run, because there is something to that as well. This is Corman said that George Miller told him that this was a big influence on Mad Max, which I can see.
I can see, because I'll tell you what, that Tak Fujimoto approach is, he does the same thing that George Miller eventually kind of like turns into his signature shit with the Mad Max movies, where the camera. If you watch a lot of car chase, there's been a million car chase, but I love a fucking car chase movie. But typically when they do this, nobody ever thought to do this, probably because they were afraid they were going to destroy their camera equipment when they did it. But they fixed the camera on the inside of the car, on the hood, off the back of the car. So you never really, you get a sense of speed, but like from the point of view of a driver, what this movie does and what George Miller eventually does with Mad Max is he fixes the fucking camera to the front, to the bumper of the car. So you are cruising at who knows how fucking fast, just inches off the road. And it gives this movie a real feeling of velocity.
Well, it's the same. And maybe it was just that they hadn't invented that rigging yet. The one that, because there's a similar style where it's essentially kind of affixed to the driver's side door, and it's a similar thing where it's just maybe they hadn't invented that yet, and so it was just sort of like practically they didn't really know how to do it. What I think is so interesting is that Paul Bartel, if for people who are not familiar, he's a very kind of most people would not be that familiar with his movies. He made Eating Raoul, which is a great movie. It's very funny. Fantastic movie. He made that. Did he make, God, what's the one?
He made Lust in the Dust.
Yep. He made Lust in the Dust. Did he do Heart Beeps?
No, that's Alan Arkush.
What's the one I'm thinking of where, Jesus Christ, someone just mentioned it to me the other day.
Who? Alan Arkush also worked with Corman a shitload.
Yep. Private Parts. So he did that one.
The Howard Stern movie?
No, it's from late 70s. He made another movie called Cannonball. So he did some stuff with AIP. Private Parts is a really bad, like weird robot sci-fi thing. It's not very good. But this is like, car chase movies are not his thing.
Right.
It's kind of weird that like this is the one, because a lot of this movie is action oriented. Like a lot of it is car chases. And I think Corman probably had a lot to do with that. Like Corman did a lot of the stunt driving in this, when the stunt drivers were like, I'm not driving that.
See, get out of the way. I'll do it.
Because they were like, there's a lot of times. So they would take, he bought like a shitload of like VW bugs.
Yeah.
And
so that's
he built the sort of like, fiberglass frames around them. But because they didn't really know what they were doing. The cars have like no horns. They have no lights. They have like, none of this is legal. Like none of this is street legal. And so all of the stunt drivers were like, if we get caught driving these on a Los Angeles street, we will lose our license, and that will be our job. And so he was like, fine, get out of my way. I'll do it.
Yeah. Cause at the same time, like that's the thing is they got these VW Beetles, and they stripped them down to like the barest parts of the chassis, and then they built up these just utterly ridiculous car bodies around them. It's these fiberglass bodies that have like knives and fucking bullhorns and like snaggletooth
they're
monster
real
front
cheap
ends
looking too. Like you could tell this is like paper mache shit, and it's awesome because it's just
great.
Like,
it's very funny. It's the thing is by this point you don't really have an expectation of what you want from one of these movies, so they just give you whatever, and you're just gonna be like, okay, I guess that's
sure.
funny.
I don't know what else it should look like, so why not?
Yeah. But I mean, it's very much a characteristic, a sort of signature characteristic of the movie too. Is
yes,
these just utterly silly cars.
Did you ever play Fallout 3?
Yeah.
So the president in Fallout 3 is played by Malcolm McDowell, who does the voice of the president, and his name is John Henry Eden. I feel like his whole performance in Fallout 3 is taken from the president in this movie, because it's very much like, did you know you are American? And this is America. And here's what America is. Like, it's this very, unfortunately, prescient kind of patriotism that's like so hollow and ridiculous that it's clear the whole thing is a sham, because this is a pretty cynical movie. But it's, again, in that way that we're watching from 1959. Yeah, he makes this kind of like really satirical beatnik thing through these like big kind of opulent on a budget Poe movies into the 70s. Like, he's adapting so quickly to everything. Like, the society is changing so much from 1959 to 1975. Huge changes, like economically, socially, culturally, everything. And to just see him turn like this is a movie that is nihilistic, but also in a kind of hippie, hopeful way. And
because it gives you this idea that like you can if just people just organize, they can topple this regime. I'm like, oh boy.
Like there's a point, eventually throughout the story, you learn that his navigator is actually one of these resistance members, and she's sort of been sent in to infiltrate and undermine and destroy him, because Frankenstein is sort of the star of this whole operation, essentially.
Yeah,
and you learn eventually that like he is also trying to sort of destroy everything in a very nihilistic way. But one of the things he says to her is, she's like, he's like, why are you here? What are you doing here? And she's like, oh, well, this is my job. And he says, your job is a waste of time. The world doesn't want to be saved. And he says it in this way that's kind of like, oh God, you're right though. But there's something about it where it's like this post-60s hangovers kicking in really hard, and everybody's feeling really bad about everything. Like, you're feeling bad about the government. You're feeling bad about society and the economy. And you don't really know what to do, so you just want to burn the whole fucking thing to the ground. And that probably sounds pretty familiar right now. But but there is this kind of ending that is a little bit hopeful, that's like, but just keep going somehow, and maybe we'll all kind of push through.
Yeah. And I mean, all it takes really is just a hand grenade.
Yeah, a hand, but that happens to also be a grenade. Very cute moment. Though he does say, because eventually Frankenstein becomes president, and one of his goals is to end minority privilege. And I was like, what's that now?
I was like, what'd you say? What does that mean?
And I don't know. Like, I was like, does that mean like political minority or minority? Because I don't know if I like that part.
Yeah, I do. I don't know. I have no idea what that line means. I'm gonna have to fucking look it up.
We also get Don Steele is in this movie. Don Steele,
the real Don Steele.
Yeah, Don Steele. He plays Junior Bruce. He's also rockin' Ricky Rialto in Gremlins. I believe he's Screaming Steve Stevens in Rock and Roll High School. He's another guy. He was an actual radio DJ. And I think in, California for a while, and actually for quite a long time. And he shows up periodically through Corman's movies, and then Joe Dante uses him a bunch of times. But what I love about his character...
He is the 70s incarnate.
He really is. And what I love about him in this movie, his character's name is Junior Bruce, and he's sort of like the what do you call that? Like the...
he's the hype man for the whole thing.
Like he's sort of narrating. It's not. There's a word
He's
for
the
this.
he's the color guy, the commentator.
He's an announcer essentially, and what I love is that he has the energy of someone like in a John Waters movie who's just like shouting his lines at the top of his lungs, and he's like a little unsure of why he's there, but like he's just like, okay, sure.
I love that
I'm game.
He's sort of contrasted against this like really dour Howard Cosell type.
Yes,
it does the whole thing. But yeah,
who this at movie the end is basically just like, yeah, shut up.
Yep. This whole movie is just through and through is just utterly ridiculous. Even the photography, like the sort of propaganda footage of the president talking against like the rising sun in the background and stuff.
Some of the shots in this are beautiful. Like this is a really well shot film.
Yeah.
But I just think it's so interesting to start where we started, which is 1959, and to kind of track this man's career. And, you know, Corman's career goes on for another 30 years, but like, it's, you know, this is really his heyday. And you just see the way he is adapting to everything that's changing all the time. And he just seems to know where to be and when to be and how to hit every single time and who to bring with him to do it. And I know that some of that, there's a rosier framing of that, maybe more often than not, that is undue, because I think a lot of it there is a sort of an exploitative quality to it, but it is a picture of someone who just knew how to move and how to change, because Hollywood is such a fucking
it's a numbers machine. Like what works, and we're going to stick with it forever, you know, until somebody forces our hand.
And as soon as you can't keep up, you are just fucking chucked in the trash. I mean, that is what Sunset Boulevard is about. It's about like, sorry, we don't have any more use for you. You're no longer valuable. And Corman found a way every single time to be ahead of that game in an industry that is basically designed to fuck you over. And he was just ahead of it every single time. And because of him, we have the genre that we love, you know, these, you know, sci-fi and horror and fantasy to a much lesser extent, but like, and he even gets into, like, he brought a lot of the Ingmar Bergman stuff to the US, like shit that you have no idea that he was involved with, like Oscar-winning films. He had a hand in it. So like all of the things that we love as fans, he touched in some way or was directly responsible for. There is nobody else like that. And I don't think there ever will be.
No, he was truly just a one of a kind. There will never be another filmmaker or, you know, sort of I hesitate to use the word visionary, but like he wasn't an auteur, and I think that's what makes him so remarkable. Is he didn't come in with this sort of asshole-ish quality. He was very much just like, I'm here to make pictures. Get out of my way, son. Yeah, but like nobody did it. Nobody does it in the way that he did it. And I don't know if the sort of conditions, if the sort of industry conditions, even at the independent level, are the same that could really kind of support that kind of a filmmaker. But like,
well, no, the industry isn't the same either.
No, but it's crazy.
But he is the Hollywood legend. He is someone who walked into the mailroom and was like, no, I can do better. And then he did, and he did everything.
Yeah, it's fucking nuts, man. I mean, 98 is quite an age to live to, but like still, it feels like we kind of lost something very significant.
Well, he was the last of the great showmen, the great Hollywood showmen.
Yeah,
there just aren't. There's none of them are left, and there's a reason to mourn that, I think.
Yeah. It was like when I realized that like all of the Ramones are dead.
Yeah,
it was like,
holy
shit,
I mean, there's this CJ. Never mind.
Yeah, okay. But yeah, Roger Corman. What the
Roger
fuck?
Corman,
hell of a filmmaker. You know, absolute icon. So yeah, there it is. 4 pictures, and honorable mention of Mask of the Red Death.
Hell
which is a fucking hell of a movie. Like, if you want to really celebrate the man's life, do it the Bring Me the Axe way and watch these 4 movies that we mentioned.
Yep.
So yeah, we will be back in a week with another Bring Me the Axe one. We have a couple of guests joining us to talk about the Blair Witch Project.
Yeah, we're bringing it into the 90s.
Yep.
For all the people that are like, oh, he's an old time. That's another old-timey story. Boo!
Yeah, get over yourselves.
Yeah.
We're giving you guys a soft pitch. And then, we'll be back in 2 when 99 Cent Rental takes a look at Siege.
Canada.